Yeah.
So I'll call the Board of Selectmen joint FinCom meeting for October 18th, 2020. It is 6:33, and we'll start with a roll call vote from the Board of Selectmen. So we'll start with Rosie.
Rosie Kennedy here.
William Olson.
William Olson, back in Boston here.
Nice. Jamie.
Jamie Knutson here.
Darcy.
Darcy Dale here.
And myself, Sean Farrell here, and it's yours, John. Go ahead.
And I'd call to order the Finance and Advisory Committee and start our roll call with Christina Schenk-Hargrove.
Christina Schenk-Hargrove here.
Dave Wanger here. Nick Tense here.
John Prulidge here. Valerie McCormick is not present. She may join later, but for now she is not present.
All right, so tonight's agenda is hopefully fairly simple. Reviewing our STM warrant with the FinCom. And Joe, do you want to?
I stepped up because I heard a noise in the hallway. Did you guys do the Pledge of Allegiance?
Oh, we didn't do the Pledge of Allegiance.
We didn't do the pledge.
All right, so let's start with the pledge. So, all right, I pledge allegiance
Allegiance
The flag.
to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic
For which it stands,
one
one nation,
under
under
God,
God,
indivisible,
indivisible,
with
with
liberty
liberty
and justice for all.
justice for all.
So to make this easier for us, so again, sorry for the two different versions of the warrant and for some things getting through so late today. Obviously, we had town council working with bond council to try and get some of the language right, particularly on the stuff around the town hall project and the special election ballot question. So took a little bit of time for them to get back to each other. I think KP's been reaching out since Friday and they finally talked to Locklord today. So apologize again for the lateness. But to try to make it easier for you, we also put all of the questions into a PowerPoint, which I think you got before you got the warrant version. If you want, Sean and John, I can put it up and share so we can go through it one slide at a time. To you.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that'd be probably most efficient.
Find it here. Got it. Oh, okay. Oh, we got somebody else joining the party. Okay. All right. Somebody just checked in. I don't know who it was, just so you know. I have.
Oh,
All right. So that's the first pertinent information. Sean, tell me when you want to go. You want to go start with the next article?
All right, let me just exit out of this. Okay, so obviously we can move on to the next slide. We've got the date and the time right.
All right, so this is the, go ahead, Sean.
That's all right, and we haven't really talked too much about consent actions yet, so we could probably skip over that.
Actually, hey, Sean, maybe as we go through the other articles, we should talk about whether they potentially be in a consent motion.
Perfect. That sounds good to me.
Joe, one question with I left it as being held in the auditorium, but if that's not correct, we'll have to update the location for the town meeting.
Yeah, it's actually going to be the gymnasium, so we'll update that in the warrant.
Okay.
Thanks, Tom, for pointing it out. Okay, next question.
Oh yeah, so this one's prior year bills, and I think the total was about $1,100. I can't quite see it on my screen. I got to move my view.
Yeah, it's $1,084.97. What happened here? I was predicting it to only be a couple $100, but we became aware late Friday afternoon that the next to the last payment due to report from when they were running the town COA service in May got misplaced. Evidently, they accidentally sent it to town hall at that time instead of the COA, but they addressed it to Mary Beth, so we never saw it. We never got it paid. They finally asked us about it last week. So I had to add that $875 bill to the other bill that was for 200 and change for paper goods and staples bill.
And Joe, just a clarifying question, is any of this going to be in an appendix, or can we list it right in the article?
I can do either. I can do an appendix or probably just two bills right now. As long as it stays at two bills, I'd probably just list them both in the article if you want.
Yeah, I think that's fine. Yeah, I mean, if it gets more than 4 or 5 things, maybe a appendix, but I think even then you could probably include it in the article.
After you approve the warrant language after you vote the final warrant language next Monday night, then it's too late anyway. So I'll list the 2 items right in the article.
Okay.
And Joe, what was the 875 for the COA? What was that for?
That was for, remember we had Beauport was running the under
Okay,
contract
Beauport.
on senior transportation services for us, and they actually gave us a break because they were under contract through December of this year, and they offered to stop running the service on July 1st because we got CATA to start offering a service on June 1st. So they did us a really nice solid and didn't continue to enforce the contract. They let us out of it. So.
And the other bills are like a bill from Staples or something, right? And
Yeah, the other bill is a bill from Staples for paper goods. Again, it was evidently, they tried to invoice us in May, and, we don't have any record of receiving it, but we do have the second invoice, and they sent us back a copy of the original invoice that was dated 5/15. We didn't see it or get it, probably because we didn't have very many people in town hall at the time. And the other bill that we thought we had, we were able to chase it down and kill it. So it should just be these 2.
and then I guess for my board, if we feel comfortable voting on some of these as far as recommending tonight, I'm welcome to entertain that, unless you want to wait until the meeting of the 26th. I don't think it matters too much if we want to wait, but some of the things are kind of lower hanging fruit, would help speed things along at our next meeting, but it's up to the board.
I would be for just voting on this one now.
And also including it in the
In the
consent.
consent agenda, I
Yeah.
think so, yep.
Can we do that for this one? Because it's a 9/10 vote. I don't know if we can.
Tom, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I'd have Tom weigh in on that.
Yes, so the problem, I guess, that could develop is that if it's less than, if it's not a unanimous vote on the entire consent calendar, then the likelihood is you're going to have to count or separate that one out. So I probably would not recommend including it. Generally speaking, we try to include in the consent agenda articles that require the same quantum of vote.
That makes sense. Okay, so
Here's
Yes.
kind of another, that's a good question. I think another kind of clarifying question, Joe, would be, since we're going to be using the clickers during this meeting, if we pull anything out of the consent agenda, how does that work with the clickers? Does that affect anything?
No,
Or
it's just,
You're just
Well,
only voting on the ones that
We
the
do.
consent agenda.
Refresh my memory, because I don't think we've done it since I've been here, that anything's been pulled out of the consent agenda. You don't need a vote, you just need somebody to say hold, right? And then
Right.
that item gets held, and so you don't need a vote to hold. So,
Right.
so if any member wants something to be discussed, any member of the town meeting wants something to be discussed, they just shout hold. That
Right.
item gets pulled out and the rest of the consent agenda gets voted. That's the only time you need the clickers is in the vote.
Right.
the only issue, Sean, is in the script. If he has to script in the votes,
Right.
you have to script in like a placeholder for a second
Yeah.
possible vote. So
Right.
we'll just remind him that there may be if something gets pulled out of the consent agenda, there may be
Right.
possible votes, but I think that's easy for him to
To
do
adjust,
that.
okay.
okay.
Right, so then I guess I would, it seems like we'll leave it, even though it seems like it's a slam dunk on this, we'll leave it off the consent agenda. But I would entertain a motion to recommend favorable action on this, even though it kind of says we already do it. I think they've already kind of filled in the blanks for us, but
Right.
I
So
move-
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I move that we vote favorably to approve the prior year bills.
Second.
all right, any discussion from the Board of Selectmen?
Yep, do it right now.
Okay, then I'll take a roll call vote. We'll start with Rosie,
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Darcy,
Darcy Dale, aye.
Jamie,
Jamie Knutson, aye.
Bill,
William Olson, aye.
and myself, Sean Farrell, aye. John, does FinCom want to discuss anything, or do you guys want to make any recommendations?
No, and in general, I mean, I'll talk specifically to this one. We've talked about almost all of the articles and have a general consensus on almost all the articles. We've only voted, I believe, one of them, mainly because a lot of them just had things to be filled in. For example, this was the dollar amount wasn't final.
Right.
We could vote this. We'll probably re-vote everything at our next meeting just so we can have full unanimous votes. As opposed to having a 4-0. It's always nicer to have a 5-0. So we'll probably re-vote it anyway. Our consensus was to recommend favorable action. So I don't see that changing.
Okay. Then Joe, you want to move on to the next one? All right, so capital expenditures, see if the town will raise and appropriate or transfer from available funds the sum of money for the purpose of capital funding, etc. And the expected request is $576,334.
So do you want me to share up the,
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, the detail, yes.
Yep.
try it this way first. This is the items that are being recommended. It's you see some strike throughs and things here. There's also potentially change. Marissa identified late last week that it appears to us that our assessment on the library may have already included our share of the library roof repair and the server. So we're trying to confirm that right now with Wenham. When I spoke to Anthony, he wasn't sure. They went through the process of having it on their capital. So he was asking us to include it on our capital, which we went through. We vetted it out with everybody back and forth. This was here. But then Marissa discovered when she was looking at the Hamilton Wenham assessment to Hamilton, library assessment to Hamilton, it included money for capital. And we believe we're paying that in the assessment. So we're going to try and confirm that. And you may wind up taking another, what's the total here? Another $61,000 out of this request. So as of right now, that the request is at 576, but we might be taking another 61,000 out of that and get it down to 500 and whatever.
Yeah.
16 or yeah.
Yeah.
15.
I think it was already in there, Joe. That's just my recollection.
After I saw it, after I saw it in the assessment, what the printout that Marissa showed me, I called Anthony. He and I talked about it, but he wasn't able to confirm it with his interim finance person yet. It seems like the finance department over there may have added that into the assessment, even though they were also asking us to do it as the. So we may already be getting hit for that. So we may be able to take that out. I think we're going to be able to take that out.
Are we looking at the financing for the town, or are we looking, when I say finance, I mean the debt for the town? Are we looking at the?
We're not in this article. It's really, it's not the two sort of beige shaded ones. So it's everything except those.
Those two, okay.
Everything except those two, and then the ones that were stricken out, we've found ways to cover those in the budgets. So
right,
we're not.
So Joe, two I had questions on was on the water feasibility study. That's not related to the water treatment plant, right? That's the secondary supply.
Right. So this was that one was added in by the capital committee as a suggestion, a recommendation, or request. We had been seeking $100,000 in funding from the MVP grant process to study alternatives to the Ipswich River water basin for our water needs. And when we found out that we didn't get that, the capital committee suggested that we continue to push that forward. I'm lukewarm on it. I want the money. I think that we need the money. I'm fine to put it forward. My two questions are, one, I really don't know that a feasibility study belongs in the capital plan. And then I don't think that we should be paying that one necessarily out of the water revenue fund, because this is not stuff related to running our water system. It's looking at our future water needs, but it's not really related to running our water system, which is what the fund is ideally set up for. So,
and I know it's good to be proactive, but is this the right year to do it? We're trying to raise $1.5 million to build a new plant, and then we're going to spend $100,000 to study something else. So yeah. I'm not sure if it's the right year to do both. So
I was just thinking about that too, Bill.
One of the things, though, is that to keep in mind is that if, as we look to try to identify a way out of the system, the sooner we start, the better. That's going to involve, a certain amount of studying what the available capacity is, starting conversations around hiring consultants. We're projecting some very large future water plant expenses, or water system expenses, I should say, if we stay in the Ipswich River watershed. Those expenses may change, or leave altogether if we're able to find a way to leave the Ipswich River watershed. The longer we take to start looking for our way out, the more those costs are gonna weigh very heavy on our minds, both in terms of the amount, how they might change.
And Joe, how baked is this amount in terms of, do we know, is this a placeholder for how much we think it might cost, or do we have a specific quote?
We feel like it's a good start. It might likely cost more. I think if we're able to come to an agreement to try to appropriate this money this year, it would be good for us in terms of when we meet with MVP and tell them that we're going to apply again, because I think we're going to need ultimately probably more than $100,000. And if we have put in some, it should help us unlock grant money from other sources, because they like to see when you have some skin in the game.
How much, I mean, when you say it's a good start, are we talking 200, 250?
Yeah, I think it could wind up being that much. It's going to take place over several years. It's going to be, first of all, identifying the best option for us to pursue, initiating some contract language, if that's going to be with another water, or doing some test sampling, test drilling in the North Coastal Basin to see if we can find our own water source, doing some tests with Manchester to see if their water source is A, large enough, and B, clean enough for us to be able to bring over. We're going to have to run some financial analysis on what it would take if we went in with Manchester, but they want us to run that plant. How much does that cost over the long term versus finding another source? So there's a lot of different variables to look at. I do think that it'll take us the extensive help of an engineer for a good 2 years or so, and additional, contractual help, both with the legislature and with other potential partners in Beverly and Salem, or in Manchester, or the MWRA, whatever the option.
Are we currently aware of any items that are time sensitive, where we don't make a decision or a movement on a water source, it would go away if we don't do something this year? We currently aware of any of that? Okay.
No, I'm not aware of anything that would prohibit, if we don't move this year, that would prohibit us from seeking it out next year.
Bill, what about the grant? You just mentioned grant money. Do you know how much, or what impact it would make?
We applied for $100,000 and we're not awarded in the last round. We have, actually, Tim and I have a meeting scheduled with the folks from MVP next Monday. That grant round would potentially open again for new applications in the spring. So we intend to pursue it one way or the other. But as I said, we'd probably do better if we showed that we were already working on this on our own, that we needed their assistance, not for them to bail us out.
That would be a way to get the grant money.
Yeah, I do think that if we're writing the grant in the spring and you guys want us to revisit this with an annual town meeting on May 1st instead, that's a possibility. I'm not married to that. And as I said, I wasn't 100% comfortable with it in the capital plan. It could be a standalone article with an appropriation.
I kind of think that the timing is close to right, but it's not quite right.
Yeah.
I'm kind of leaning more towards ATM instead of STM with it. And I'm just kind of thinking of if we've got more movement on 133 Essex, and that possibility of doing some more testing over there, that might be timely, because that's not going to happen overnight or over the winter time. We might have a better idea of how that deal happens over the winter.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of look at it the same way, Sean. Is sort of like, what do we actually lose by not approving it now and putting it up in the spring? And I think probably not a whole lot from a timing perspective.
And I'm kind of hoping there's more people at ATM with our current kind of virus climate. Hopefully we're kind of better off than we are now, and more people will have more awareness about what we're trying to do with the water. Then it will help kind of educate the people.
I don't know what
now something Joe is.
I don't know what you mean by what kind of environment. I think we had the biggest turnout in the last one.
Yeah, right.
That was the worst environment.
Right.
Joe, is there any negative consequences if we hold off for a few months and wait until ATM?
It just slows down, some of us being able to do some. We can do some of that work in-house with our in-house engineer already. We can, but I'm okay if we want to hold off a few months and bring this back in annual. I hope that we'll get everybody's support at that time because, we do recognize that you're going to have to sometime in the next couple of years here make a decision. Are we going to stay in the Ipswich River Basin and therefore make a bunch more expensive improvements to our system, or are we going to look for a different, better source that won't be as depleted and as subject to drought and such?
I think with you say, are we going to stay in the Ipswich River and with more expenses? We should know what those expenses are too. And you may have a better chance of assembling that information before ATM. The other thing is we could also reach out to Manchester sooner than later. That doesn't prevent us from reaching out to Manchester and finding out what their appetite is working with us.
I have had some initial, some exploratory conversations with their town administrator, Greg. He's open to the idea of opening the system to us. His belief is that the current plant in Manchester and the water source wouldn't be enough to fulfill all of Manchester's needs and Hamilton's needs. So we'd potentially be looking at having to bifurcate the system if we went to there. And part of the deal for them is that it's very expensive to operate that plant. It's a tier 4 plant. We only operate a tier 3 plant. Licensing for an operator for that plant is tough to come by. In fact, they haven't been able to hire anybody. That's why they spend quite a bit of money having an engineering company run it for them. So, their initial conversation with us was, well, we'd probably be open to sharing the water source with you. It is in your town, but we'd want you to run the water plant.
Right.
So,
and the kind of catch-22 is that we would probably have to hire the same consultant or a different consultant to run it because we don't have any level 3 or 4 plant operators we've got a different level of plant. So our plant's only a tier 3 plant. So, those would be some of the challenges, but those are the types of things we need to identify. We need to actually have them, fleshed out next to what the other options might be. We need to potentially, as Sean alluded to, look at that other site on Essex Street and potentially any others that we can identify. I'd like to coordinate it so that if we're going to try to do any test wells, we do all available sites at the same day or week, so we can have a couple different things to look at. So does anybody feel strongly about keeping it in here?
I don't. I mean, I love the concept of it, and I would certainly be supportive of it in the spring, but I don't feel strongly about having it now, and I prefer to have it in the spring. But
I agree. I think we.
I agree.
I agree. I think we need to. If we're presenting enough water issues on this bill that I think that we don't have a clear. If we don't have a clear message on this item, it's going to be harder to sell. Why are you doing both if you don't know why you're doing the other one? So, I think we need to make an agreement that within the next year we need to figure it out. But I think we can let it go.
I agree.
Yep, I do too. I think.
all right, so I'll strike that out. So that leaves us everything except the town hall and the water treatment plant as capital.
Joe, can you talk to the patrol SUV again and just talk about what it's replacing?
We had questions about that too.
About what?
What the patrol SUV is replacing? What's the lifespan of the existing car that's being replaced?
Okay, so the existing car that's being replaced has over 120,000 miles on it. We've got about $6,000 worth of vehicle maintenance that needs to be done on it. It is at the end. So we have a regular replacement plan for patrol vehicles. This is the one that's due next. If we don't fund this one, it will cost $6,000 up front, and it will likely require other repairs between now and the time we do wind up replacing it. So,
right. And I think this patrol vehicle, we're past when we were going to replace it anyway, correct? This was a hold off from our last meeting.
Right.
Because we've got a normal cadence in our 3-year plan or whatever on the kind of rotation of these with the DPW trucks and stuff like that.
And then do we expect another one to come up in the spring?
So,
I don't think so, right?
Chief about it, but I don't think so because not in the capital plan. So he tries to replace one within the operational budget. every year. So this is the year when we buy two. And so we always have the right number of vehicles always operating properly with, you remember these vehicles run pretty much daily, year round, all day long. So they accumulate a lot of mileage, a lot of wear and tear really quickly. So we're trying to replace I believe it's 4 vehicles. We're trying to replace 1 vehicle every year, except every 3rd year we try to replace 2. So this would be the one that needs it the most right now.
Would you comment on whether purchase or lease?
We've consistently been purchasing. If you wanted us to investigate a lease option, we probably could.
I believe we looked at a municipal lease for them, and for some reason, it escapes me, but we didn't do it for some reason, and I can't remember the reasoning behind it. Think we were better off purchasing them because we're still buying them through a municipal bid program.
Right.
May I?
Yeah.
This is Marissa. I don't know if you can hear me. I'm having technical difficulties today.
We can hear you.
Have leased. Yep. We have leased in the past. We do have a couple of leased vehicles with All American. So that could be a possibility.
Marissa, do you remember? For some reason, I remember we didn't lease a handful. I don't remember if it's DPW or the police patrol vehicles, but is there a benefit to leasing now with? I mean, is the municipal lease rate better right now than it would be buying outright? Or is it just a different kind of when you're paying Peter and Paul, I guess?
Well, I guess the big benefit would be to have an annual payment versus having to pay it outright. The interest rates right now are pretty low. I don't know what the interest rate would be on the lease right now. I could find out about that, but I would say that the benefit would be if we were hurting for funds and we wanted to have it an annual payment for the next 3 to 4 years. We could do that versus buying it out.
What do you think about that, John, and FinCom?
Yeah, I mean, in general, and it was good to get the clarification that this was only because we were sort of buying 2 in the same year, because generally we just don't feel that these should actually be in a capital budget, because this regular replacement of police vehicles is just it's part of an operating budget.
Yeah.
Right.
I think this was done so it doesn't increase the budget in 1 year and then you decrease the next year, but
come out of the operating budget.
That sort of exactly what the line item is going to be every year. I think it's worth exploring. I'm not sure for this specific vehicle, but in general, we're certainly FinCom is in favor of having as much in the operating budget as possible. The cost of maintaining the fleet.
Right. Chris,
you're not paying outright. You're paying over a longer time.
Right.
Right.
You're paying more, right?
If I may, normally, if it is a lease purchase agreement, that annual expenditure is included in the operating budget. The only time that it gets included in the capital plan, it's every the year that we do have the 2 vehicles versus 1. But if it's funded through a lease, it's in the operating budget.
The whole thing, exactly.
The whole thing is, and if I remember correctly, and I apologize, I believe my computer just crashed, so I don't have access to any of my files right now, but I actually thought that this was the year that we were due to purchase 2 vehicles, but I think one was actually pulled by the chief, so this might actually be the only one.
I would say then if this is the only one, then maybe we think about putting it back in the operational instead of the capital.
Yep.
Like that.
Well, you've already funded the police budget, so if you're going to do that,
you have to find the money.
A new article. You either need to create a new article to put money into the police budget, or you'd need to leave a smaller amount here for a lease for this year.
What's the general consensus?
Marissa, I'm not sure I understood you correctly. If we put it into the operating budget, is it just the operating? Is just the payments that we make on the lease, or is it the total amount?
The payment on the lease.
Okay, so we're not talking about 55,000. We're talking something like seven or 8,000.
I think it'd be more than that.
Yeah, I don't
I
think,
think
I think it probably could be more. It'd probably be $1,500 to $2,000 a month with the mileage and the cost of the cruiser, but.
And then I guess
but
my
If I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken, the last time that we did a couple of leases, one was for the DPW
Mhm.
director's truck, and the other
Right.
one was for the police chief.
right.
And I believe the annual cost was right around maybe $9,000 a year. And
Hmm.
those were included
All right.
in
Well, I guess that's
the,
closer.
that wasn't, yeah, and that was included in the operating. Unfortunately, like I said, I can't really look up anything right now.
So then,
But
if I may interrupt for a second, Marissa, to Joe's point about we've already funded the operational budget for the police, what if is it feasible to, if we were to change this to a lease, include the lease in this capital budget for now, but then the remainder of the lease would go into the future operating budget for the department, right? We could just switch it. We pay one kind of lease payment out of capital, and then the remainder of those leases go back into their operational budget like it normally would. Does that seem feasible? Or do people seem like they want to buy it outright?
Just one point, Mr. Chairman, if the intent is to lease purchase the vehicle, they did, I don't know when the last time the town lease purchased anything, but they did amend the statute that relates to lease purchases a couple of years back. So it will require a 2/3 vote. And there's kind of a specific form of article the article would follow similar to other borrowing articles. So I would say if the intent is to lease purchase this vehicle, then we would want to have really probably a standalone article to deal with it.
Okay. What are people's thoughts?
I think we should go ahead with this one this year and save the decision of whether to lease versus purchase. Make a considered decision as to which way is the better way to go, rather than we don't want to vote for $55,000 right now. So let's just kick it down the road, no matter what.
Right.
We don't know what it's going to cost. Is it a good idea or is it not? We just don't know at this point.
I would agree, Christina. I think you got to solve that question first, and then once you do it, just a consistent path.
Right.
And probably what's going to happen then is you have seven lease payments of $9,000 a year.
Right.
Which is some number that I can't do in my head, $63,000 a year, right? Which is more than $55,000 a year.
Right. Yeah. Right.
So just doing that simple math doesn't to me doesn't sound like it would work. So I'd rather keep it now. Now since we already had this is the way that this was planned, and we already put this off, and this vehicle needs to be replaced, or it needs to have work done. So I'd rather keep it in now.
Joe, I could be. The last question is what do they do with the existing vehicle that gets sold, and then the money from that sale goes where?
I mean, running back into the general fund, but I can't imagine it would be a ton of additional.
But it's something. But it's something, right?
Yeah, but it would go into the general fund. Any proceeds that we receive would follow the general fund.
What year is it?
Joe, do you trade in the vehicle as part of kind of the purchase so that it offsets the purchase cost, or do you sell it separately?
we traded in.
My guess is it's probably traded. Marissa, do you know?
Yes, it's traded in.
All right. I'm convinced that we should go ahead now and solve this problem without putting the department in a bad position.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think, but in the future, for next year, because we're going to be doing this every year, that when we start to talk about this, we have more of a discussion about leasing versus outright. But we'll only have one next year, so we won't have kind of two at the same time. It looks like Chief pulled one out, so we'll have to see what the status is next year. If it's two next year, because we've taken the usual cadence of two this year out. If we've deferred a year, we'll have two next year, so we'll have to figure that out when we get to it.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the two vehicles the year when you switch over, if you're going to switch over at all.
Right.
Okay. questions about any of the other items on obviously the two that shade, the town hall and water treatment plant will be separate standalone articles because of the borrowing. But are there any questions on any of the other items here? My recommendation is to have these be paid out of free cash, just as we were going to do in the fall, at the annual one before we push these off. We've gotten it down a little bit, especially if we're able to take out that library stuff and these other things that we've moved in. It will be 517,000 instead of.
Yeah, I like that. And then the repeaters for the ECO, that gets us up to code and everything like that, or not code, but whatever the regulations are, right? With the issues we're having.
The upgrade with the ECOs is the ECO repeaters is that we have 3 repeaters around town that are so old that you can no longer even buy parts for them.
Right.
We were originally looking at doing 1 a year for the next 3 years if we had done this starting last summer, spring, whatever you want to call it. And then because of trying to put things off, capital projects off, we pushed those off. Because we got new radios, what we'd like to do is replace 2 of the 3 repeaters right now. The parts from those 2 old ones could be kept.
Used for the other one.
The third one, if anything goes wrong with the third one, and then we'll revisit it. We'll either buy the third one in the spring or a year from the spring.
Okay. That sounds good.
That way there we'd have 2/3 of the system would be brand new and they do work. The chief had already priced it out. I had worked it out with our consultant that helps. It would be able to work with the other repeaters. It's just that the equipment they don't even make and sell anymore. So they would allow us to keep the third one running for as long as we need it.
Okay. I don't have any other questions.
Joe, I'd just like to discuss briefly
funding,
raise and appropriate versus bonding. Versus use of free cash for bonding. I'm not sure these are the years, this year and the next, where we want to lower our free cash, albeit remaining within our policy minimum. But I'm not sure it's prudent to come closer to that minimum. I think, Marissa, you indicated if this were to be funded by free cash, that would leave us with 7% available, the minimum being 5%. So I understand we would still be within that structure of our policy, but considering the condition of the state in terms of its revenue and considering the unknowns about the federal government, is it prudent to use free cash here if we can fund it by raising and appropriating without, as to this item, bringing us into override territory? I'd ask you to consider it. We've had this discussion at FinCom. I've indicated I wouldn't vote against this matter were it to be funded by free cash, but I think we all need to be cognizant of and sensitive to where we're headed next year and where the state may be headed and whether it's prudent to retain as much reserves as possible.
Let me just add as well, David, and thank you for bringing that up. I think this year, and this is a different year because our capital got bifurcated from normally we'd be approving an ATM. But I think in the future, the question might also be, in an annual budget cycle, our capital transactions that are, of this sort of, $500,000 to $800,000, things that are not bonded, should we really be funding them out of free cash, or should these be things that we are raising and appropriating? And every year may be a little bit different, but I think it's something to potentially think about before ATM is what is our policy and what should we be doing? Because in some sense, the more you do it and the more you draw down free cash, it becomes harder to do that. This is a different year. We ended up having more free cash after last year. And raising and appropriating right now, given that we're up against Prop 2.5, might be problematic. So I'm not sure STM is the time to do that, but I think it's certainly something we need to talk about before ATM.
I think so. I agree with that.
Yeah, if I can, I absolutely understand the concern about this. And I agree, it's not a great time, but if we agree that these are items that need to be replaced, I'd propose that we're better off paying for them with money that we have, that's ours, that's already been raised, rather than continue to try to hit the taxpayer right now, because we may be asking them for an override next year. So if they're sitting there watching and they're paying attention, they're seeing that we're not using free cash to keep from buying something, and then we're going to turn around and ask them for more money next year.
Right. And a lot of these things in the capital plan are, the reason we're using free cash is because they're one-time expenditures, and in theory, besides a patrol car, but things like that in the past is because we're not bonding it because it's not a long-term kind of thing.
We get, if you remember at the annual town meeting on June 20th, we had some people stand up that didn't want us to appropriate any of our free cash to the stabilization funds. They wanted us to try and find a way to turn it back to them. That's not good fiscal sense. I know the FinCom and the Board of Selectmen understand that. It makes sense to budget for our needs, and then what we save during that process or get extra, we use for one-time costs. And that includes funding our stabilization funds. I know we're not completely where we want to be with the general stabilization fund, but an expenditure of this amount from the free cash will keep us within our minimums of free cash on hand. Next to, we're getting pretty close to having our minimum stabilization fund met as well. And we'll have an annual town meeting appropriation at the ATM in the spring to go to stabilization and capital stabilization funds again. But I think it's going to be really difficult to ask people to raise and appropriate for capital items this year, now in November, and then in May, we're coming back and asking them to raise their taxes again. That's just my opinion.
I think it's a sound opinion.
No,
Any other?
I agree with a lot of that, Joe. I do think, though, we should, as we're planning things out, just try to understand what is our policy, because we have a bunch of reserve policies, but this, I feel, is sort of a whole, which is how are we generally funding capital transactions? Just saying that they're one-time expenses means we use free cash. I think there are limits on how much free cash we want to use. And maybe it's as long as we're above X percent. Anyway, we can talk about this certainly post STM, but having something that gives us guidance going into budget season might be helpful.
Okay, I hear you. I get you.
I think that's good, John. I like that idea of some kind of a percentage or an over/under kind of a policy. And we kind of review it if it's up against that mark or over it. And if it's under it, we just go ahead and do it. But I think that's worth the conversation. And I'd like to start working on the kind of remainder of the FinCom and the financial policies that we got recommendations from the state. We checked a bunch of those off a year or so ago, but we've got a handful still to go through. So maybe we kind of add that onto the list.
That'd be great.
All right, just writing it down. All right. Any other? Were you going to say something, Rosie? Was that you?
Yes. I just have one question about the $250,000 for the gas tanks. And I just would like for you folks to refresh my memory. How long is that pilot going on with Wenham, where we're using the tanks over at Iron Rail?
And we signed an agreement to do it for 1 year, and you signed the agreement in February. Of course, we weren't able to start until almost July because once everything got shut down, we weren't able to use up all of our gas forces to go over there sooner. So I think we have an agreement with Wenham that we'll run it, for a year and, starting July 1st. So that'll give us, we're going to need to, in short order, make a plan here.
Okay. So then my question is it necessary to allocate that $250,000 now, or is that something that can be put off depending on what the ultimate resolution of the pilot is?
And Joe, they need to replace their tank as well, correct? So this 250 would be either working on replacing our tank as an above ground tank in our DPW yard, or putting in some money to help them if we keep going ahead with the agreement with them for splitting the cost of their tanks.
Right. No, I understand that, but I'm just thinking we don't need this until at least next July. So I'm just wondering why we're allocating it now. And so that's my question. Is this something that we could do at the ATM in the spring?
I guess we certainly could, but my thing is that we're going to need to, determine if we're building with them or by ourselves, we're going to have a new tank. We're going to have to sign contracts, everything else. I can't sign contracts until I have money appropriated for the fact. And if we say that the pilot is up in July, on July 1st, for instance, if we got to July 1st and we had neither any money appropriated nor a contract signed to replace it, we'd be asking them, hey, could you extend this while we get our stuff done? If we wait and appropriate the funds at annual town meeting on May 1st, we won't have those funds until July 1st. So I guess what I'm saying is if we appropriate the funds now, Tim and I can work to determine where's it going to be? Is it going to be here? Is it going to be there? Is it going to be someplace else for us to continue to share? And then we can sign contracts with the company to develop it so that it'll be built when we need it.
Right. And this is when I think I feel that we should leave it in on this STM because our tanks are beyond their useful life, if I'm correct. We're kind of on borrowed time with them, and we don't want to have a situation where we have some kind of a leak or something like that, and then we've got to do some mitigation when we're doing town hall and stuff like that, and then that gets into a sticky situation.
In full disclosure, we've already emptied the tanks here, and Tim had the folks from the state come out to decommission it. So we can't use that tank that's in the ground right now anymore. So at some point or other, we're either going to have to build a new above ground tank because nobody does in-ground tanks anymore, or we're going to have to help Wenham build one that's suitable for both towns to use.
Right.
To me, it's most likely that we're going to try to stay with Wenham as much as possible. We just need to determine if the existing tank system out there is of the right size, or do we need a bigger one? Do we need 4 places to pump so that all of our vehicles can refuel at the same time? Particularly, we're thinking about winter operations. We're trying to determine if the iron rails is the right location. There's an argument to be made that's not even the right location for Wenham. It's just land that they had available. We may decide that we want to stay together, but we want to be closer to the 2 town centers where most of the plowing needs to happen right away. So those are the things that we're going to be weighing out over the next couple of months here. Once we make that decision, it'd be nice to have the money so we could go forward with that plan. And like I said, have the tanks ready when we need them, as opposed to then be trying to rush everything.
Well, again, I'll just stand by my statement that I'm not sure we need to allocate that now when we have ATM, and we can certainly we can allocate an amount when we know what that amount is going to be and when we're going to need it. I am all for fiscal conservative activity, and I think that we don't really know how much we're going to need or really when we're going to need it. And so I will agree with whatever the boards agree with, but I do want us to think about just allocating funds for something as of right now is not a sure thing in terms of how much money we'll need and when exactly we'll need it. So that's
I was just going to say, even though we're allocating it, it's still going to be sitting in the general fund until it is needed. Isn't that right, Joe? It doesn't get pulled out until it's absolutely needed. So is that right?
Yeah.
Because it would give you flexibility, because we don't know what's going to happen. But if it's there and it's been allocated, you'll have that flexibility. So if an opportunity comes along, you'll be able to immediately jump on it because you'll already have the money allocated. Right. So I don't see any harm in allocating it because it's going to allow us some flexibility.
Right.
And we're not appropriating for it either. So free cash.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
It's not going to affect the tax rate.
Does it get interest when it sits in the general fund? I think it does.
And I would too say that, you know, the $250,000 is a round number. So I know people look at it and say, okay, well, we don't have a real estimate of what it's going to be yet, but that's actually pretty close. We've had the company come out, give us an estimate based on the size of our system and the number of vehicles we have. They've done the same thing in Wenham. We know that there's a certain amount of cost to pull the old tanks out of the ground. And then the cost of a new system that would be the right size for Hamilton would be about $200,000. If we do merge and we build a bigger system with Wenham, our share of that would probably wind up being very close to $200,000. So that 250 is a good number because that takes care of our cost of removal, remediation of the site, of the existing in-ground system, and then our $200,000 share to either buy our own standalone system or our share of a joint system. So we're really close. We know what the cost is for the new system. We have had it quoted to us. So.
Is there any, if I may add, that with town hall renovations?
Yes.
Is there any money in the town hall renovation budget for site work that includes removal of those tanks, or has it not been included in that?
No, it hasn't been included in that because we knew we needed to do it, whether we do the town hall project or not. And so there's another good reason, because if the town hall project does get approved and gets approved by the voters, we'd want to pull the tank out here as quickly as possible to make the site ready for all the other activities going to go on it. So.
Okay, I just want to make sure we weren't having it in two different places. So, okay, that's good.
We don't.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
John, any comments from FinCom on any more of the capital expenditures?
No, that was it for us. So once we're confirmed on the library stuff being in or out, we will. I anticipate that we'll recommend favorable action.
Yeah, I'll kind of say the same for the Board of Selectmen. I'd rather wait, if it's all right for everybody, we get that number and we find out about the library roof, etc., before we make a recommendation.
So we agree we're going to look into the library roof and we're going to remove the $100,000 for the water study. And then
That's right. Yeah.
Agree with everything else. Okay. Do we need to make any sort of motion, Sean, or is that it? We move on.
No, we can just move on.
Okay.
May I? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Maurice, go ahead.
I might have missed the first part of the meeting while I was trying to connect, and I don't really know what the background on the conversation for the library roof was, but that money has already been approved.
Okay, that's one thing we need to verify, and we're kind of waiting for you to see, because I thought it had already been allocated. So if you're confirmed,
it has.
Perfect.
Correct. Both projects on the library were approved at annual town meeting. When we were provided with the library assessment, they included a capital number that included those two items.
Right, I remember that because I was kind of amazed at how big that number was for the library.
Right.
Yes.
Had a lot of questions on that one. All right, so we'll just wait for that kind of final number then, and then we'll vote it on the 26th, if that's all right with everybody.
Yeah, we'll be taking $161,000 out of that number that's there. So it'll be, be 417 or whatever it is. Or 27, whatever. I'll do the math. We'll get it figured out. But that number is going down dramatically. So.
All right. Next slide then, Joe.
Got it. Okay, there we go.
All right, water treatment. See if the town will vote and authorize treasurer to borrow some money in accordance with the general laws, etc. Expected request is $1 million. And this is all for construction improvements to the town's water treatment system. We've talked about it quite a bit. And if anybody wants to add any details or FinCom wants to weigh in on it, you're more than welcome to.
We actually did, this is the one article we did vote on, and we did recommend favorable action unanimously. I mean, taking a step back, originally I know 2 were proposed. We think this is the one to go for at this point. So we certainly support this action.
Sean, I mean, we've talked about it at length, and we also recommended the carbon filtration system as well. So, should I make a motion? I make a motion that
you can make a motion. We can discuss it if we need to.
Yeah, make a motion that Board of Selectmen recommend favorable action for Article 2-3.
And second.
All right. Any discussion from the Board of Selectmen? No, I think we've talked about this one quite a bit, and we've picked the filtration system and everything. So I'll go ahead and call the vote. I'll start with all those in favor. Say aye. We'll start with Rosie.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Darcy.
Darcy Dale, aye.
Bill.
William Olson, aye.
Jamie.
Jamie Knutson, aye.
And myself, Sean Farrell, aye. And John, you said you already voted on it?
We did, yes.
Okay. All right. So next one, Joe, 2-4. The pool revolving fund. This is to transfer some available funds, $820.75 to cover the deficit that we had. That's pretty self-explanatory because of closing the pool, which we all didn't want to do, but we ended up doing.
Yeah, no, it was the right thing to do at the end of the day. And we ended up spending only additional $820, right? So
I assume that the increase should be a decreased in the revenues.
Oh, due to decreased revenues. Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, that was, I actually corrected that in the most recent version that I sent over to Joe.
Okay. Oh, right.
So,
That's right.
yeah, we were still working with bond counsel with respect to the town hall borrowing articles, and in the process, I continued to review the warrant and make some additional changes, and that was one of them. So I did catch that, but thank you.
Okay,
that would have
great.
confused quite a few people.
Yeah.
All right, I'll entertain a motion for favorable action on this one if someone wants to make it. I think this one's pretty easy.
recommend favorable action. The board of selectmen vote favorably on Article 2-4.
Second.
All right, all those in favor. We'll start with a roll call with Darcy this time.
Darcy Dale, aye.
Rosie.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Bill.
William Olson, aye.
Jamie.
Jamie Knutson, aye.
And myself, Sean Farrell, aye.
Is this not a consent motion? What do we need out here? Do we need 9/10 as well?
Tom, can this one be done by consent?
Yes, this could be included in consent. It's just a majority vote on this one.
Okay, great.
I'm in favor of moving this to consent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
So moved.
What about the previous one? Was
I
that?
was just going to say, what about the previous one? Was the can you go back?
Oh, no,
The
No.
last one was a borrowing article, so that would be a 2/3 vote.
Right.
There was another. There was another one though, but maybe I'm
No, I don't think so.
No.
Capital expenditures.
no.
We've only done 3.
Feels like we've done all of them, right? All right, CPC appropriation, and this one is for Affordable Housing Trust grant, and they're asking for 200,000. And it's been kind of par for the course over the last handful of years for the Affordable Housing Trust, and the CPC has granted them a series of these, and basically this, to Darcy's point earlier about the kind of encumbering the money, it makes them a little more nimble to move on properties and things that come up with the Affordable Housing Trust. So
is there not because we didn't actually have any specifics on this last time we met. Is there not a specific project that was targeted? I thought earlier language we'd seen had talked about a potential project.
I thought there was.
Yeah, there was a specific project that at least that the Affordable Housing Trust voted on.
Jamie, do
Yes.
you know if it included this new money, or was it from the money that was already kind of in the kitty?
It was, it was a vote to request the $200,000 from the CPC or funds for the project at 430.
Asbury, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. So maybe we need to reword this thing.
Well, if you do that, you're going to wind up tying the AHT's hands. They'd only be able to spend the money on that project.
Oh,
if the project goes away or something else gets in the way, or they have problems negotiating with the developer and they want to take and put those funds toward another project that comes up, then their hands would be tied.
Yeah.
They need to come back for another town meeting vote.
But is that a problem? Is that a
My
bad thing?
understanding is the Community Preservation Fund had supported the appropriation for $200,000, but not specifically.
It wasn't specifically.
Okay.
Could we maybe put in the summary, if to Jamie's point, if this is potentially for that habitat project, maybe in the summary, we could say such projects as the Habitat project on Asbury Street. You know, it doesn't specifically designate it for that, but it says they could. Or
Well-
they want this with that in mind.
What about the project I did downtown? Has that been already funded?
That's all, yeah.
Yeah, that they use the majority of the money, if not all of it, for that Willow Street project.
Because how much is left in the trust right now?
Jamie, do you know offhand?
Marissa?
I
Marissa?
don't.
Don't think there's much there.
Unfortunately, I don't remember off the top of my head and I can't access my files.
It's yeah, that's okay. It's not very much, if anything.
Sorry, I can
Okay,
send
so
you an
it's-
email tomorrow with all of that information. But
But it's-
unfortunately, I can't remember right now.
Sounds like it's relatively nominal.
It is. I think to the point that I think and Jamie, I don't know if you were on the board at the time, but Rosie may have been. I think that to the point where the AHT's vote in favor of the Willow Street project, I think also included the money that we're due to get in December from the Canterbrook project. So
I think it does.
they were planning to dedicate that money when we receive it to the Willow Street project as well. So they really, this is their only amount of money right now that's on the horizon.
Right. And I would make a comment that I would like to see, because of an unresolved issue with Habitat, I would feel more comfortable if we just left this as a general grant from CPC to the Affordable Housing Trust until such time as that issue gets resolved.
I'm okay with that, because I think, and Joe, maybe you can look back at past warrants language, because I think it, like to Rosie's point, it has been general. It's just been an open grant.
Yeah.
But I think the
Mr.
fact that
Chairman?
we're trying to use it for the Habitat project is good, but I don't think we need to specifically name it.
Mr. Chairman, there was a question about what the balances were, and I did find Marissa's email. And this was an email that was sent on Wednesday, October 14th. The unreserved fund balance is $291,852.35. Community housing, 101,945. Open space was pretty much depleted. There's $61.52 left. And historic preservation has 109,675.82.
All right, so that's what we have in CPC. It's just that I think for the Affordable Housing Trust, they've pretty much balanced out to zero. I think with the expenditures for Willow Street and the payments that they have made the Habitat. I think they've done 30,000 or so for Habitat to hold over the purchase and sale, or what, I can't think of the whole terminology there, the options on it. So.
Also, is there a way that we can have some oversight to make sure that all the paperwork, with the deeds and all that would be taken care of before occupancy permits are given out? Is there some way to link that so that we have a little bit of leverage so things are done correctly? Because if we bring this to town meeting and the legislature votes that money, they're expecting that to happen. So, but we don't really have any verbiage that directs how it's supposed to happen. So maybe we could, because I think it's critical for trust.
So if I could help with that, we've already asked KP Law to take up the issue with the Affordable Housing Trust. The Affordable Housing Trust is using their funds to pay KP Law to draft the draft language that will put those governors in all their contracts and have the, milestones and everything. Things don't get done until X happens. So we've already put KP Law in touch with I think it's Marnie and Patrick Reffett, and they'll be addressing that in due course here.
Oh, that's wonderful. Good news.
And I thought I heard Marissa trying to break into that connection.
I was. Sorry.
That's okay.
So just to clarify, were you looking for the numbers on the CPA fund or affordable housing?
Affordable housing.
Right.
Okay. The affordable housing as of March 31st and I know this is old, this is the only thing that I can access right now through the town's website. As of March 31st, there was about $878,000 in that fund. And I don't recall any significant expenditures. I think we did have a $30,000 payment out of the fund. So I want to say that the fund still has about 800,000. But I can definitely
But the CPC voted 500,000 for the Willow Street project.
The affordable housing you're talking about, Rosie, not the CP.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, so I think the Willow Street was about 500, and then the Asbury Street was another 200 or so. But then I think they switched to 30 to hold it, and they were going to hold the money until the Habitat moved forward a little bit more before they let go of that money to Habitat. So I think if everything kind of goes through, they'll be close to nothing, and they're hoping that this will put some more seed money back into, if all the projects go through, the Habitat project comes to fruition and everything else. But,
Right.
but
Okay,
we'll
so
have
I
maybe
asked-
Marissa give us an update on that when she's back in town.
Well, I apologize. I haven't gotten any communication that these funds have been reserved. So right now I'm just looking at the numbers, how they sit on the general ledger.
All right.
Yeah, and I'll go back. I'll have Pat Shannon and Patrick Reffett look back too, because I believe there was an Affordable Housing Trust vote. I think it was in February or March. At the time the Willow Street project was being finalized, and I want to say it was kind of right before everything got shut down, and that's why none of us have it in our present memory banks. But I actually thought it was $1 million overall total that was going to the Willow Street project, and if you take the 800,000 and the 30 and the 250 or 260 that's coming in December, that kind of almost all balanced out right to what you had in Affordable Housing Trust. I think that's where you're going to wind up. But I'll be sure to have Patrick and Pat research it both in terms of our minutes and what was voted at the Affordable Housing Trust back in late February, early March.
Yeah.
Jamie, do you have something to add?
Yeah, so if you want me to, I can read from the minutes of the July 30th meeting that describes a good bit of, so do you want me to, or?
Yeah, why not?
Okay. So the report was that the trust had $842,585.54 on hand and expected that 217,500 in from Canterbrook. 500,000 has been committed to the Willow Street project. And yeah, so that, anyway, that's all it says as far as funds on hand. So there's some, and where it was currently allocated. So that's a paraphrase or reading from those minutes.
And then the 30 or 35,000, I forget which number it was, to hold the option for 34 Asbury.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
So in theory, they've expended half of the $1 million that they had or will have with the Canterbrook payment in December. All right. And then Jamie, if you could find out, or Joe, to find out what the ask was from Habitat and what we're thinking about committing to that project. Do you know offhand?
Yeah, the ask is going to be 700,000.
Right. So that puts us above what we have for the most part.
Right. Yeah, it's going to be in I think 400,000 for acquisition.
Right. There's kind of a stage
for construction. That's what the Habitat ask is going to be. Hasn't been approved.
Right.
Right.
Right. So I think it's up to the townspeople really, but I'm fine with supporting this because I think we're expending more than we have at the moment. And this will help us hopefully break even on what we're trying to do here.
Do we have a date for filling in the unspent sort of deadline.
What do you mean?
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you mean like the year-end report from the AHT?
No, just
So-
the actual warrant article itself, and maybe I'm looking.
Yeah, no, this
Yeah,
is,
PowerPoint,
I
not
basically used the same language that was in the same format that the articles have taken for the last several anyways. Town meeting warrants that we have in our files. So I just followed the same format. So I did have a note to actually on this one to see whether or not we wanted to include this language or not. Most of the CPC articles have always had language in there specifically that says that if the funds are not expended by a particular date, then they could be returned to the Community Preservation Fund after a vote of the CPC determining that it's unlikely that they'll be needed to be expended. So I included the same language here. I don't know that we necessarily need to, but ultimately it's really a CPC decision whether or not it should be included.
Yeah, I can speak for the CPC. We give a 2-year window.
2 years is the window. Okay.
So, Tom, if you want to add in the 2 years there so that you can expend the funds in that 2-year period, other than we review the grant, close it.
So that would be 2020, 2022? Is that what you're thinking?
23.
23,
Okay.
yeah, January
Okay.
1.
Okay.
And as far as the Board of Selectmen, do you want to wait until our 26th meeting to vote on this one? Or do you feel comfortable recommending it?
I'm okay voting for it, recommending it, as long as it stays a general appropriation like this without any specific designation.
I'm okay with that. What do the rest of you think?
Well, is there any indication that there might be changes to this between now and then?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. All right, then we should probably vote.
Okay.
Well, with their changes, you'd have to revote it, right?
Right.
Right. I don't anticipate any changes because we don't have another CPC grant funding meeting. I mean, we have one, but I doubt we'll revisit the grant amount. So if anybody wants to make a motion for the Board of Selectmen.
I'll move that we vote to approve the Community Preservation Affordable Housing Trust Grant, Article number 2-5.
I'll second.
All right. And a roll call vote. We'll start with Rosie.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Darcy.
Darcy Dale, aye.
Bill.
William Olson, aye.
Jamie.
Jamie Knutson, aye.
And myself, Sean Farrell, aye. And FinCom, did you already weigh in on it?
I mean, I'll let any of the other members say if they disagree. I anticipate that we probably would recommend favorable action. We haven't really discussed this in detail, and so I don't want to actually vote on it until our next meeting so that Valerie can.
We said we were going to wait on everything anyway, John.
Yeah, and we're generally going to wait on everything anyway, but for this one, we really hadn't formed a complete consensus on it. I still, I definitely would recommend that any member that's opposed to it that's at this meeting potentially voice any concerns they have. I personally don't have any concerns, but I'll leave any other committee members to weigh in if they do.
I'm fine.
All right, so then next article, Joe, 2-6. Next CPC article for the First Congressional Church, the Clock and Belfry refurbishing, restoration, and the total amount, is it in here, Joe?
Yeah,
75,000, there it is.
Yeah.
And so this, for FinCom, I think I spoke about this at our last Board of Selectmen meeting, but FinCom that wasn't there, at the CPC meetings, we had quite a robust conversation over a handful of meetings about what was deemed church and what was deemed kind of town appropriate to spend. And they were asking for about 120,000, and we decided 75,000 would cover the kind of town related cost and not the religious cost of the steeple and different aspects like that. We felt there was enough history in the building with it being our first meeting house and town hall for a number of years. And we've already, maybe a decade ago, refurbished the clock there. And this would be another refurbish of that clock and the belfry.
And I don't know if anyone remembers going back 10 years, was there resistance to that CPC spend at the time?
No, there wasn't. I don't even think anybody blinked at the time.
Okay.
John,
We actually owned the clock for a number of years. I think up until maybe a couple years ago, we owned the clock, and then we had a kind of a almost like a deed restriction on it, and then we gave it back to them. And this time around, the CPC, we're working on language for and Tom can correct me if I'm wrong, because I think Mr. Lee was writing it up, was a historical.
There's a historic preservation restriction.
Right.
That would apply that goes along essentially with the grant of CPA funds for this purpose.
And Sean, how did you determine the 75,000 versus the 120?
We thought that we wanted them to, the 120 was the full amount for the full project. And we felt that we wanted to stay away from some of the religious part of the restoration. And plus we wanted them to have some, as we often say with the CPC, we wanted them to have a little skin in the game and raise some private funds from their parishioners or other funding grant sources. And so we felt 75 was that kind of just for the clock and the belfry, and excluded the other bits.
That wasn't by way of an estimate from a contractor. That was just the sense of the right division.
We got a breakdown from the contractor, and I think we even went under what the kind of portion of the restoration was that was still non-church parts.
Thank you.
We're actually under. I think when we did kind of the split of the estimate, it was about 86 or 88,000, and we went under that.
John, if we restored it 10 years ago, does that mean every 10 years we're going to have to be? They're going to have their hand out?
No, I don't think so. They're using some different, I think, materials this time. But they're still keeping within the historic district. But I'm hoping that with the historic preservation agreement that they are up to keeping it up to spec. And if they do come ask us again, I would imagine we'll probably say sorry.
Yeah.
So Sean, I had a couple questions you had, but one is, if the money wasn't spent renovating this, it could renovate other, town-owned properties, right? And
right.
Does the first grade, do they offer, do they let the public use their facility? If we want to go and have a meeting there, would they let us use the facility for free?
That's a good question. We didn't pose that question to them, but I would imagine they probably would. They're very receptive about different things. And, they know that they can't do this project on their own. And so this is really helping them out. And plus, I think that the significance of the building for the CPC members was enough to approve the eligibility of it. But we haven't asked if we could have meetings there or anything like that. But
I'm just trying to,
No, I know what you're saying.
Not quid pro quo, but trying to sort of balance it out to say, does it make sense to use taxpayer dollars to fund something that taxpayers may not be able to? I understand the historic, idea of it.
Right.
A homeowner might buy a historic property and not be able to renovate it, and then they can ask town for more. So it's a tough one.
Yeah, and we've done some other projects that have been religious in nature. We did the tabernacle at Asbury Grove years ago. And, we do use that as a community. Sometimes I know when the Sunday at the park concerts get rained out, sometimes they'll go there, and we've used that. I mean, not as a municipality, but as a town. But go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Sean, Bill's points were exactly the sort of concerns that FinCom had, which is, A, how much is the public actually going to be able to use this? And B, what is this actually, what other projects this is potentially taking money away from.
Yes.
Right.
And those are the kind of questions that are going to be
Yeah.
asked.
And one of the points, and as you kind of said that, it made me remember that we had, one of the big things for us was the clock. We saw that served the public purpose. You know, it didn't check all the boxes like Bill's saying, using the inside space, but the clock served the public purpose, and the historical nature of the clock with the town. But we didn't discuss any kind of using of the meeting space or the indoor space itself.
The project actually doesn't touch the indoor meeting space either. That was one of the things that was funded, I think, through a previous project that the church had done, they said. And one of the concerns that we had brought up with respect to anytime you're utilizing CPA funds for a religious building is to really separate out the historical and secular components of the building from the religious components of the building. And so typically the interior space would be devoted towards worship. So that was certainly not something that was part of this project. It's limited strictly to the belfry and to the clock.
So
Sean, I'm not ready to vote on this tonight, Sean,
Yeah.
but I'm okay with it being on the, I think it's okay for it to be on the ballot. I think it's probably an interesting just a debate, but do we have time to talk about it one more time?
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
We'll talk about it on the 26th.
And I'm not sure everybody else feels that way, but
I'll
I'm
try
not
to
ready
reach
to
out.
vote.
I'll reach out to I think his name is Jeff. I may be getting his name wrong. I forget.
Jeff Kester.
Yeah, Jeff Kester. I'll reach out to Jeff or have Jay Butler, the chair, reach out to Jeff and just kind of ask him if there's any other kind of benefits or things that we can think of that the town, would benefit from other than having the clock restored. If there's other kind of tangible items or things like that, like you said, like a meeting space or something like that we could use if we needed or something like that.
Well, it would pay for the cruiser and then some. I mean, we have to start putting our house first instead of someone else's.
Right, but we couldn't use CPC funds to buy a cruiser,
No, but we could use it for other things, maybe move some money in the general fund and then use
a town hall or something.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Right.
And there are ways to move it around is what the point is, without.
Right. And then to John's earlier question about other projects, kind of future CPC asks, we have kind of a running list on the CPC website, and we kind of poll people every year. Are you coming this year, or what do you think your priority is? And we don't really have any besides the immediate ones with town hall. We don't anticipate a lot of big asks the next year. So we might have a slow year next year unless a lot of people really come out of the woodwork with new projects.
But we just sit on the money. The money doesn't have to be spent. It could.
Right. It doesn't have to be spent.
And because we don't know what's going to happen,
No, and in the CPC, we've had a brief discussion. We've had a few over the years about, does every project that's eligible come to town meeting? And up until this point, we've brought everything forward because we've never had competing projects for the amount of money we've had. So we've deemed them eligible and then let town meeting decide whether they think that it's a worthy cause. So it's ultimately up to the legislature, as Darcy would say, on the town meeting floor to appropriate the money for it. But we've never denied anybody outright, even if they were eligible, to say, no, we don't feel this is a worthy cause. Most people have kind of done their homework and checked whatever box, historical or recreation or whatever, to make it eligible.
So
but that is a future conversation that we will probably have as CPC funding kind of dwindles and we have more asks for different needs in town.
Sean, I just have a question and then a comment. The belfry, we would be restoring the belfry also. Is that correct? That's part of this
Correct.
grant? Okay, yeah. So I have to say, I think it's really cool to have that belfry. I think I can hear it from where I am a lot of times, and I really do find that a valuable asset to the town. And then as the queen of fiscal conservancy, I will say that I did read town council's opinion on whether we should be able to, we should offer our approval to this ask. And I have to say, I think that the discussion from town council really pushed me in the direction of saying, yes, we should do this in terms of the historical nature of that building, regardless of what it is now. The clock and the belfry are quite significant to the history of Hamilton. So I would urge us to think about voting positively on this article.
Right, and to kind of piggyback on Rosie's historical statement there, I went to the David McCullough lecture there and read his book, and just blown away by the history that Hamilton has in the westward expansion with Manasseh Cutler and et cetera. It's really remarkable that our little town has such a significant role in the expansion of the United States. It's kind of amazing. So I think, keeping that building in a
good working order.
A good working order is relevant to not just Hamilton, but the whole nation, really.
Yeah.
And I would even say, it's not on the National Historic List, but it's in the historic district, and it's registered in some way, but I don't think it's been deemed at the higher level of National Historic Site, but it might be something they look into at some point because of its significance.
Yeah.
Just
So-
me opining.
Tom, would you share with FinCom that memo that Rosie referenced?
Let me think about that one. I want to make sure we're preserving the attorney-client privilege with respect to attorney-client communications, but the gist of it was an analysis of recent case law with respect to the expenditure of CPA funds. And as I had mentioned earlier, the key for, in our opinion, in terms of being able to withstand any challenge to a grant to a religious institution is to make sure that the funding is restricted to any secular or non-religious components of the building, which is why we had determined that in our view, it would be most, in the event of a challenge, we felt that it would be easily or readily, we'd have a very strong defense with respect to any claim related to expenditure of funds with respect to the clock and belfry.
But apparently you were able to convince Rosie by
yeah,
fact.
that was not designed as a persuasion speech piece. I will say that it was more of just an outline of what the law is and what, in our view, would be acceptable versus what would be unacceptable, such as, for example, if the funds were being expended to, to rehabilitate or to restore stained glass windows that had religious icons on the windows, for example. That would be something that would be an inappropriate use of public monies for, if you were to restore a crucifix, for example, or something like that, then that would be problematic.
I understand, Tom, but FinCom wishes to pursue its due diligence as to church-state issues, and would be, and so I assume your memo would be helpful and informative, and I would thus make that request.
And I'll add, if I may add, for the Board of Selectmen and the FinCom, I don't remember if I had mentioned this to the Board of Selectmen, but in our conversations with Jeff Kester at the last CPC meeting, we had talked about our concern with that separation and if there was anything contested once the money was granted. And Jeff agreed that if there was some kind of an issue with the funding or someone opposed to it, that we look like we're going to litigation or something, that they would not take the grant. They would give us the money back if there was any kind of a problem. They didn't want us to go down that road if it came to that. They wouldn't keep the money, or if they had expended it, they would give it back to us.
Sean,
There's
I appreciate
There's also
that.
language in the warrant article as well to that effect at the last couple of lines.
I don't want to spar about this issue, gentlemen, but FinCom has a responsibility to do its due diligence in terms of ferreting out these various themes and arguments, and is going to make a recommendation that will be a public record. So I would renew my request.
Yeah,
So,
and
Tom-
I would just add that I think we haven't discussed this fully, but I think it'll probably be, it's going to be a tough one and probably a pretty close vote for us. So
Yeah, so I
So-
think,
the more
Go ahead,
information
Rosie.
we can get, the better.
go ahead, Rosie.
So I just wanted to say that the part that was persuasive to me, and maybe Tom would feel and Sean would feel comfortable sharing this portion of the memo, is just the history of the Belfry vis-a-vis the value to the town, and maybe not the entire opinion, but what was very persuasive to me was the history of the, as I said, the Belfry and the clock tower, and maybe that would be sufficient for the FinCom to review in terms of deciding whether they think it's it's worthy of voting for favorable action.
And
John,
I would just add two things. First, the information concerning the history of the building was included in the applications that were submitted. There was an original application, and then there were at least one or two amendments to that application, which goes into fairly good detail with respect to the uses of the building and the historical significance of the building to the town of Hamilton. And then with respect to the opinion, ultimately, if the Board of Selectmen has no issue with that opinion being shared, I don't have any problem with it. I'm just trying to make sure we protect any inadvertent disclosure.
Of course.
John, when's your next meeting that you're discussing things?
The 28th.
All right, so if it sounds good to you, I'll share, and I'll make sure it's okay with Jay Butler. I'll share, or have him share, the grant applications for the church. It's probably one of actually the better grant applications we've had. It's very robust. Jeff Kesser's done a ton of work on it with research and whatnot. So we can share that with you, and you guys can review it at your leisure before your next meeting and see if that helps make any decisions for you.
John, I'll leave it to you. I don't want to be an aggravating factor here, but there are 4 lawyers on FinCom, or 3 lawyers and a half. I'm retired. But it seems to me that the factual background was probably used in applying precedent. So it'd be helpful, to me at least, to know the legal arguments as well as the factual background. But I'll leave it to you.
Is there any reason? I mean, it's the BOS's call whether we can see the opinion, right?
Right. So
may I just say one thing?
Yeah.
The fact that they're willing to not take our money if there's a lawsuit says to me that they have the money to do it themselves.
I don't think that. I think they just know that if there's an issue, they didn't want to be a problem. That's my understanding of it. It didn't seem like they had the money.
Or they would be able to raise it over time. I would
Right.
imagine that.
I think I don't know with Jeff if it would be, a much longer process, and then in the end, maybe to the detriment of the building and more money. I'm not sure. Often case, if you're doing more deferred maintenance on something, it becomes a bigger problem.
I know, and it's only been 10 years since we poured a ton of money into that structure.
Right. I don't remember the original grant for the clock.
I think it was a lot. It was
about 10,000 or so, maybe.
Oh no, it was more than that.
Was it more than that?
Yeah.
I can look it up. Maybe it was.
I was shocked, in fact, to hear that it hadn't held up. I was shocked because we paid for that.
Yeah, I'm going to look that up.
And is there also a way, if this does go through, if the townspeople do vote, is there a way to make sure it doesn't get spent on anything else except that? How does that work?
Yeah, the CPC's made it clear, and Tom would be working on the language for that.
Right. There's 2 pieces to that. There'd be a grant agreement that specifically says what they can use the funds for. The CPC presumably would have some sort of reporting requirements as well. And there will also be a historic preservation restriction recorded on the property as it relates to the clock tower and the belfry.
Right. Plus we get receipts from everything. That's how they get reimbursed with the grant from the CPC. So they have to show all their work, kind of, if that makes any sense. All right, so I think I'm guessing from the kind of general discussion that we will revisit this on the 26th when the board meets again. So we can probably move on to the next one.
John, thank you for the discussion.
Yeah.
Just one other thing, Sean. I mean, is there any problem sharing the opinion from the BOSs?
I don't particularly have one, but I would let the rest of the board and Joe weigh in on it.
I don't. I have to read it again to see if there's a reason why it needs to be an executive session or whatever. So, but let's.
I don't recall any reason why we couldn't share it with FinCom.
Joe, I can make a motion. Let Joe decide if it gets released. I have no problem with it, but I haven't read it yet. But I have no problem. Joe, I trust Joe to release it.
Calling me tomorrow.
What's that, Joe?
Sure, put it on me. So David will be calling me tomorrow first thing.
Yeah, just read it over, Joe. Make sure there's no adverse comments that may be a risk to the public, and then get it out there.
Everybody else okay with that?
Yeah, I didn't see anything that was I didn't see anything that I thought was a problem, but I did read it a few weeks ago, but at the time, I thought it was a good opinion and it didn't breach anybody's privacy, or it didn't seem particularly
right,
something that we should be careful about.
Right, and for me, it was more. It wasn't specifically leaning one way or another for my reading of it. So, yeah. Jamie, did you have any comments on it?
No, I mean, I haven't read it, so I'd be happy to read it. But
all right,
but I don't think I'd oppose releasing it to the FinCom.
All right, so Joe, if you could look that over then, and then if you think it's fine, the board's fine with you releasing it to the FinCom. I don't see it as an issue.
Okay, good.
All right, thank you.
All right, 2-7.
Come on. There you go.
All right, and our third CPC, all the marbles here, the town hall building project, to bond, a whole lot of money here. Where is it?
Where's the dollar amount?
3 million.
3 million.
3 million. Is it written in there? Am I missing it?
I don't
it's
see
at the brief summary.
There it is, the brief summary. This article seeks to borrow 3 million, which Community Preservation Act funds, et cetera, for debt service restoration rehabilitation of town hall.
Doesn't the amount need to be in the article?
This is language I got from council.
Yeah, the amount needs to be in the motion. It doesn't necessarily need to be in the article. It's common to see, a sum of money, for example, for any type of an appropriation article, as long as the motion includes a funding source and a specific dollar amount, then that's fine.
Okay. Do you think it needs to be in the article, the rest of these, so it's more clear, or do you think it's okay with it in the summary? And
well, I think it's fine as it is. If you want to include it in there, I think we could. We would essentially just replace to appropriate a sum of money with to appropriate
$3 million.
$3 million. When the motion is made, the motion will need to include the specific dollar amount in it. But
right.
Unless there's a reason it's going to change, I would just prefer it being there to let people know, so it's not a guess when they come to town floor what it's going to be. So.
And if I could offer just by way of trying to educate the public about this, we know the public, some of the public doesn't even know about the project yet, and we know that they're going to have they won't have the actual dollar amount in the warrant for the next question because we don't open the bids until November 6th. So if we can, provide the public with some assurance that $3 million of the project, whatever that total cost is going to be paid for out of CPC and won't be affecting your tax bills, that might present the project in a little bit more positive light.
Yeah.
Can you once again summarize how we're presenting it? We're going to do, there's 2 asks for money and they're going to be in the same article or back-to-back articles?
Back to back.
I think
Back to back.
back to back.
Right.
We had
Yes.
talked about doing one, but Tom and bond council settled on this.
Right. So just to kind of fill in the blanks a little bit here. So we have been working with bond council, and this is what kind of the delay was in getting the final version of the warrant to you was we had difficulty getting a hold of bond council, but we did speak with him this afternoon. And because we have funding sources, your typical kind of raise and appropriate ultimately is where the some of the funds will come from, as well as from the CPC. And because the CPC funds can only be utilized for essentially, in this case, the historic portions of the building, there was a concern if it were all included in one article, it'd be difficult to kind of apportion out which funds are being used for which purpose. And so the consensus in discussing this with bond council was to have 2 separate articles so that we didn't run into a situation where there were supplanting of funds or any type of other municipal finance issues that could arise.
Yeah, that's all fine. Just that the presentation needs to be all inclusive so people know that
Right.
we're voting on 2 articles and not 1. So when whoever introduced 2.7 needs to talk about it as a 2.7 and 2.8, because it's sort of all or nothing, right? One passing doesn't help the town, correct? So
I think that could be in the introduction somewhere, Bill. I think that
right.
that makes sense to say that it'll be voted on separately because the funding sources are separate. One will
Right.
affect our tax rate, one won't. So I think that's a good idea to have sort
Right,
of
I
a-
think
That's fine.
I think when we have our meeting on the 26th, we'll have Mr. Bowler there and we'll kind of talk about some of the procedures and presentations and stuff like that. And I think I'll probably end up doing the CPC articles because I don't think Jay Butler will be at town meeting. So I may end up presenting them so we can talk about, if Mike Toomey or whoever from the Town Hall Building Committee wants to do kind of a joint presentation or whatever before this or whatever to clarify, I think that'd be good. But we can talk about that on the 26th.
Yeah, I think
Mike
that's
is
a
planning
good
on it.
idea.
Isn't he, Rosie? Mike planning on speaking?
Yep, he is.
Yeah, so we'll kind of have to figure out where and when and all that kind of stuff is most relevant, but I would imagine it's right about here.
Well,
Right.
Joe made a comment that some
Right.
people may not know about it. I hope everybody knows about this. We've talked
Right.
about it for many years now, so hopefully
Yeah.
people are coming educated and prepared.
Yeah. So,
So-
and we're having a meeting, the Town Hall Building Committee is meeting the 22nd. That's Thursday. So we'll be able to firm things up, Sean, and refer to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. And if you could have either with one of you two ladies, Darcy or Rosie, or Mike, maybe we could even just have a few email exchanges or a phone call or even one of these Google Meets to kind of talk about the presentation and how, if Mike's doing it, how we'll work out with the both of us. I'll present CPC and then he can talk to the whole project overall, and then we can talk about the bonding. We
Yeah.
can try and figure that out.
Yeah, that's
Is also going to be speaking. He's
who?
The
Drayton.
architect.
Yeah.
So only question I had was the date on this was the 22. So it gives a year and a for the funding source. It gives a year and a half from the funding source. Is that? I just wonder what defines the November 1st, 2022 date.
Oh, you can't, construction?
Has to commence within 2 years.
2 years.
So
So
it's 2 years from the approval or 2 years from the funding?
my understanding, and I'm not sure it's accurate, but at least my understanding was that the CPC vote was that the funds had to be, that in order for the funds to be available, the construction had to begin within 2 years.
Mhm.
So I picked
Right.
November 1st, 2022, but that could obviously be revised.
I just don't want to put something that might handcuff us later, but I put the furthest date you can.
And we've done before where it hasn't been, it's been a building permits have been pulled instead of kind of ground broken. So there's a little bit of leeway in there.
Okay.
So we could pull permits on the construction and that would count as the project starting to commence.
Good. Okay.
Can I just ask
Sean,
about the first sentence in the brief summary? Does the sentence make sense? Is it just me? Which the Community Preservation Act funds will be assessed the annual payments for debt
It
service for
doesn't
the
make sense to
restoration.
me. No, Christina, it doesn't.
Thought
I
was
read it and I was
missing
going to mention it, but I'm glad you did because I had forgotten to mention it. But it doesn't make any sense. I mean, I understand what we're trying to say, but it doesn't make sense.
Very, yeah.
Work on that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sean,
I think with these two things for the summaries, we need to be fairly concise on it. So it's easily understood that we need the ballot to be included
Right.
for this to all work out. David, you're going to say something?
I'm just suggesting that once the order of presentation and the various participants is worked out, that that be shared and coordinated with the moderator.
Of course.
Do you want to leave that November 1st, 2022 date in, or did you want that to change to something else to give us a little bit more leeway?
Well, to the 14th, right? Can we only do it 2 years from when it's voted on? Is that right, Tom?
I believe that was a CPC vote. I don't know if they're meeting again and want to reconsider that.
We're meeting again I think just before town meeting.
If CBC decided November 1st, that came from CPC.
I don't know if, and I haven't talked to Jay if he's worked on this date, but we've typically just said a 2-year window and it hasn't been a specific thing, but I think I was assuming it was town meeting to town meeting kind of a thing, 2 years from that date.
Let's just say November 15th and
that's fine. We can
buy ourselves 2 more
switch it
weeks.
to November 15th.
Okay.
I know.
And then you're going to rewrite the brief summary, Joe?
Yeah.
We'll talk about it on the 26th.
Yep. I'll have a better summary there.
And then maybe we can add something in the brief summary about, Article 2-8, but.
And was the CPC vote 4-1?
I thought it was unanimous.
I thought it was unanimous too.
That language down there, I think, is carryover language from past votes. So I don't think that
carryover. Yeah, I thought it might.
I think we voted unanimously on it, but we'll have to check. I'm going to reach out to Jay too, just for kind of coordinating with him about presenting a town meeting, and also I'll ask him about the date, and we'll put it on our agenda to see that date, whether November 15th is okay.
And then in terms of favorable action, Sean, we know the board, we've talked about many times that we're ready to vote, but is it appropriate for us to vote no on this, or do we need to make any changes first?
I don't think on this article, I don't think there's going to be any changes other than maybe that sunset clause on it from the CPC, but that's kind of out of our control. It's the CPC.
You don't want to try consent?
I like your thinking, David. I don't know if it will go on the consent agenda.
What is this? This is just a majority vote for a bond. Is that correct, or is it more than that for a bond?
This is not a bond. This is 2/3 vote for borrowing.
It's a CPC. Yeah. All right. So,
do we want to recommend favorable action tonight on it? Or
I think we could vote on it.
Okay, if anybody wants to make a motion, I'll entertain it for sure.
Sure, I'll give it a try. I recommend that the Board of Selectmen recommend favorable action on Article 2-7 Community Preservation Town Hall Building Project for $3 million.
Second that.
All right, and then any other discussion? Okay, and then a roll call vote. We'll start with Rosie.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Darcy?
Darcy Dale, aye.
Jamie?
Jamie Knutson, aye.
Bill?
William Olson, aye.
And myself, Sean Farrell, aye.
If only it was so easy.
Right.
Can you, we can only let
FinCom, do
Fink-
you guys want to, you're still discussing, or do you want to weigh in?
I do know that I think Valerie joined the meeting. So, and we've discussed it at length, and certainly it's, you know, it's a lot of money.
It is.
I mean, I don't want to speak for all the other members, but a lot of diligence has been done. And I think some of what seals it certainly for me is the fact that, you know, when you start looking at alternatives, and there isn't an alternative to do nothing. And that this is the, you know, the best path. But, you know, certainly we balk a little at the total price of the project. But I would certainly entertain a motion for recommending favorable action.
Which article, John?
This is the CPC one.
So he's talking 2-7, David, to be clear.
Yeah.
I just put it back up. Sorry. I thought you were moving on.
That's right.
I'd move that FinCom recommend favorably Article 2-7.
I can second that, although I think we're missing one of our members right now.
Oh, Valerie, too.
I think Valerie's on.
I know.
You
Nick
lose.
stepped away.
Oh, she.
It looks like Nick stepped away.
Oh, Nick.
Oh, Nick stepped
back.
away.
Do you want to wait, John, and we can circle back to it?
All right. Well, yeah, if Nick rejoins, we'll circle back.
Okay.
But
So-
I do anticipate that we will recommend favorable action based on our prior discussions.
All right. So Joe, we'll move ahead to 2-8 then.
Oh, here he is.
Oh, we'll move back to 2-7.
No, I thought we were going to do, again, I agree with this, but I think we're going to do it at our next meeting, right?
Well, Valerie's actually joined the call, so she's here.
Oh,
And we have talked about this at length. So certainly if there's, we have a motion and we have a second. So if there's any further discussion, or if people think we should table this for a future meeting, we certainly can. But I do feel like this is one we've vetted for quite some time.
yeah. I think we'd have, and I think we should, if it's easy to do, let's do it. Otherwise, just do it all together.
Any further discussion? All right, all in favor?
You have to do roll call.
Start with you, Valerie.
Valerie McCormick, aye.
Christina?
Christina Schenk-Hargrove, aye.
Nick?
Nick Tenson, aye.
David?
Dave Wanger, aye.
And John Prulidge, aye.
All right. Now 2-8. Town Hall building project. To see if Town Hall will vote to authorize the treasurer to borrow a sum of money in accordance with general laws, etc., to the tune of the expected request, $4,800,000. So we're seeking to basically fund the other half of the project from CPC and previously encumbered and spent funds. That's the gist of it.
We have to say,
Whoops.
sorry, it says, I just want to understand, we use the term excluding costs to be paid from the CPA article. We have to say that. It just sometimes gets confusing when you start bringing in other
Yes.
things, but that's a legal term. We have to say what we're excluding. In order to-
Yes.
Okay.
Not on normal circumstances, you wouldn't have language like that in there, but because this involves a borrowing from two different sources of funds, and one of those sources of funds can only be used for a specific portion of the project, and if it's essentially for the historic elements of the building, then in order to avoid a potential issue with supplanting funds, we need to include that specific language in there.
Okay.
So I have a question. Will we put in somewhere how this will affect the tax rate?
Typically, that's included below in the brief summary, and then there's usually an impact with respect to the fiscal. In this case, it just deals with the fiscal 2021 tax rate, but presumably that's something that Joe and Marissa could calculate if that's something the board wants to include in the warrant article.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
important.
I think that would be transparency, and I think that we should do that.
We can, so I think that best you're gonna get is an estimate based on the fact that,
Yeah.
we're not gonna know the interest rate until we go out to that bond. And
Right.
such a large amount, just a little tiny change in the interest rate is gonna change the number. So just wanna
Can we just say anticipated impact?
Yeah,
We can do that.
I think we should do a educated ballpark guess.
So, and the other question I had was, sorry, I keep hitting mute. Sorry. The other question I had was, we've already spent, we're asking for 4.8. We've already spent something else to date, right? $700,000, $1 million to date. Has that all been CPA funds to date?
No, it was prior appropriations from town meeting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
town meeting's been paying all along.
Right. So
voting.
I think we should mention the brief summary. That's what I'm saying, because it looks like it's saying it seeks funding for the portions not funded from the CPA and previous,
Previously allocated
allocated
funds,
funds.
right?
Something. I mean, just want to make it crystal
Yeah,
clear.
I would even almost add from previous positive or something
Yeah.
town meeting votes, right?
Right.
The
I know I'm sure it'll be part of the discussion, but just so it's in the print when people get it ahead of
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
The more information,
It is going
the
to be
better.
part of the,
I was gonna say, it's gonna be part of your financial recommendations that goes out with the warrant, right? You'll have some kind of brief summary in there about what's been expended so far and.
Oh, yeah, we'll have all the
Yeah.
details. And one other thing is our recommendation is definitely that it be financed with 30-year bonds,
Mhm.
given that this is not a,
It's not a 10-year clock tower. This is a 30-year
yeah, this
project.
is a
yeah.
once a century kind of
Right.
project.
Right.
And our cupola will last for 50 years.
That's right.
Right. Hopefully
That's
it's a bicentennial project.
Yeah, exactly.
So I would actually suggest that information, the earlier information, the borrowing costs over time, maybe that should be in the FinCom explanation. Also, if it's going to be an estimate, I know that Marissa is always hesitant to give numbers like that because she just doesn't know. And if we put it in the warrant article, I mean, what it really is an explanation, right? And more information so people can be informed and make a decision. So I would suggest that be in the FinCom recommendations.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
What's this, which I think is great, and I appreciate your recommendation. They're great. I think last time we didn't get a chance to read them because we were dealing with other things, getting ready for the last meeting. So what is your timeline for those recommendations so we can make sure we have time to read them before they go out?
Well, they go out with, we will essentially have them ready to go by our next meeting, the 28th. Because we've got to get them to the printer by I think the 30th is the deadline.
Right. We'll get that. They're going to get that to me by the 30th so that I can get it to the printer so we can get it back from the printer by the 5th or 6th so that we can get it into the mail. And
Do we have a
But
meeting
then, Joe,
before
can you the minute you kind of get it and it's finalized, can you send it right to us?
Yep.
you talking about on this particular article?
Just in general, your all
general.
your recommendations. Once you have it ready to go to print with the warrant. I think last time I didn't see your recommendations until I got the warrant in the mail.
Oh.
So I'd like to see it beforehand. Not that I'm going to tell you can't do anything in there, but I'd like to.
We can certainly send it once we finalize it before.
Yeah, that'd be perfect, John. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll make a note of that to make sure you get that.
Thanks, John.
I would like to clarify something, if I could, on the tax rate impact that that you'd like to have either on the warrant or the FinCom recommendations book. What exactly are you looking for?
What about projection for FY22?
Okay, so you're looking for what, as of right now, so assuming everything else being equal, what the FY22 impact would be.
because I think, as Christina makes a very valid point about anything beyond, I mean, certainly that's still an estimate, but beyond that, it would be just unreasonable extrapolation, right? I mean, so we can assure you with reasonable estimated guesses here, educated guesses, that the tax rate for 22 will be about, right? I mean, I think that we should provide some indication, at least for fiscal year 22, and then we can say, depending on how the economy does, the interest rate, we can't project reasonably after that. Is that a reasonable statement?
Yes,
also
I just wanted,
we do know what the amount is that we'd be paying each year, or we'd have an estimate of what we'd be paying each year. And that dollar amount will be out there. So that could also be as something that they could have as a fixed number.
Okay.
Marissa, you were saying something
correct.
else?
Yeah, so as of right now, I just wanted to make sure that I understood exactly what you were looking for. So right now, we have an estimate of what we would be paying on a 30-year bond. So again, if it's 20 years, obviously the number would be different. But if we go with a 30-year bond, we have an estimate of how much that would be. And as it stands right now, it's about 6.5 cents per $100,000. So
Wow.
It would be about 60.
So I can do the have some type of disclosure that would be with everything else being equal, that would be the estimate of what your tax rate would be affected by this payment. I can't give you an estimate of what the tax rate would be for FY22. All I can give you is an estimate of what the impact of that payment would be on the tax rate.
Yeah, I think that's fine. I think
Okay.
that little
Thank you.
bit was perfect.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
that's fine.
That's
And
all we're looking for.
I mean, it's a pretty scary number if you look at that broad number, but if you think about it, amortized, is that the correct word? I'm not a financial person, but if you think about it over 30 years, it becomes a much more manageable number. And I think that would be helpful for people to understand that.
Right.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Right. Does
60
anybody
bucks.
want to chat a little bit more about this article, or does anybody want to make a motion, or do we want to wait till the 26th to talk about it some more?
Well, I mean, I think we've
I think we're ready.
I think we said that you have to vote both, all or none. So we vote
Right.
2-7, not 2-8. We've gone against our own
That's right.
advice here.
Cross
So
the Rubicon.
I make the motion to the sports selectmen recommend favorable action for Article 2-8.
Second.
All right, and roll call vote. I'm pretty sure we've already had our discussion. We'll start with Rosie.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Darcy.
Darcy Dale, aye.
Bill.
William Olson, aye.
Jamie.
Jamie Knutson, aye.
And myself, Sean Farrell, aye. And FinCom, do you guys want to weigh in on this one as well?
Yep, I would entertain a recommendation for favorable action on 2-8.
I move favorable action on Article 2-8.
Is there a second?
Nobody else wants to do this.
I'll second. I was going to give someone else a turn, but I'll grab it. Second.
All right, any further discussion? All right, I'll do a roll call vote. Start with you, Valerie.
Valerie McCormick, aye.
Christina?
Christina Shank Hargrove, aye.
Nick Tenson, aye.
Dave Wanker, aye.
And John Prulidge, aye.
Mr. Chairman, the other part of that article is the approval of the ballot question, which was not, it's obviously not included in the warrant, but it's a separate email that I had sent to Joe. So the board would need to approve that for inclusion on the special election ballot.
Right.
I have it on the agenda to happen after the review of the warrant.
Okay, that's fine either way. I just wanted to make sure that the board did that this evening.
Do we want to take it out of order right now since we're talking about it?
Might as well.
Yeah.
All right. So I would. Do I need to entertain a motion to take it out of order, or can we just take it out of order?
Take it out of order.
You can just take it out of order, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so I would entertain and I think Joe's sharing the screen here. Let's read it over here. Special election ballot question for December 3rd, 2020. Debt exclusion question: shall the town of Hamilton be allowed to exempt from the provisions of Proposition 2 1/2, so-called the amounts required to pay for the bond issued in order to pay for the cost of design, construction, renovations, and improvements to and equipping the town hall located at 577 Bay Road, excluding costs to be paid from the Community Preservation Fund, and including design and construction of the renovations and improvements to a temporary town hall facility and relocation costs and all other incidental or related costs. So that language looks fine to me. And I would entertain a motion to accept that language.
So move. Yeah.
And a second?
Second,
All right. Any discussion? All right. Well, roll call. We'll start with Rosie.
Rosie Kennedy, I.
Darcy.
Darcy Dale, I.
Jamie.
Jamie Knutson, aye.
Bill.
William Olson, aye.
And myself, Sean Farrell, aye.
John?
Okay, thank you. So Joe, we'll just want to make sure that gets to the town clerk as soon as possible, just for inclusion on the.
Yeah, I'll give it to her first. I'll send it to her right after this meeting, and she's watching at home, so she knows. She now knows that. She now knows that it passed. So.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, and we're on to 2.9.
Yep. 2-9, assessing department software. So this is to see if we'll raise and appropriate transfer from available funds a sum of money for the purpose of upgrading and assessing the department's software, including all incidental or related costs. The expected request is for $10,000. And this is updating a lot of software that is kind of past due for updating. And we're expecting to take this from free cash.
I make a motion that the Board of Selectmen recommend favorable action Article 2-9.
Second.
And I'll add to the discussion that I would actually, if council says we could move this to a consent item. I don't know.
Definitely. I was just going to suggest that.
Yep.
So I'll take a roll call vote and then we can decide whether to move it to consent. So we'll start, all those in favor, we'll start with Darcy.
Darcy Dale, I.
Rosie.
Rosie Kennedy, I.
Jamie.
Jamie Knutson, aye.
Bill.
William Olson, aye.
And myself, Sean Farrell, aye. And then before we weigh in with the FinCom, do we want to include this in consent?
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
We do.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And John, do you have comments on this one?
No, not really. I mean, I would entertain a motion for recommending favorable action on 2-9.
So moved.
Second,
We did have a question about free cash again for this one. I don't know if we've satisfied that with our other
Oh,
discussions.
sorry.
It wasn't really my concern, but I don't know if others wanted to have a discussion about that.
Mr. Chairman, you'll remember at the last meeting, you, the board actually had asked about making several of these items as free cash appropriations. So this was one of them.
Christina, what was the discussion that you were thinking, whether it would be free cash or appropriate somewhere else?
Yeah, like I said, it wasn't really my concern. Other people on FinCom.
Well, wasn't this the one that it was appropriated, it was figured in the tax rate, then it got moved back to free cash because it wasn't used. So I thought we decided on this one, it would be appropriate to use free cash.
Okay, good. Yep.
But yeah, correct me if I'm wrong on that one.
Yes, that's correct assessment.
Thank you, Bill.
All right. Then I think we're all set.
I thought you were looking for a fact check. Yes, that's what happened.
Good job. You're on top of it.
Yeah, exactly.
So I think Board of Selectmen's recommended favorable action, and then I think FinCom made a motion in a second, but hasn't voted on it.
Yeah, so any further discussion? All right, roll call vote. I start with you, Valerie.
Valerie McCormick, aye.
Christina
Christina?
Shankar Grove, aye.
Nick Tenson, aye.
Dave Wanger, aye.
And myself, John Prulich, aye.
All right, so 2-10, town clerk and election department equipment and staffing. And this is to see if the town will vote and raise to appropriate or transfer from available funds a sum of money for the purpose of funding additional election staffing for FY 2021 and the purchase of new election equipment, including all incidental or related costs, which are quite substantial this year. The expected request is $29,785. And Joe, is that our current number? I know we may be adding some more to that because we've had a lot of.
That is the current most up-to-date number today, and it won't change anymore.
Okay.
Does that include the people, the volunteers that have come forward? Does that deduct that amount?
Volunteers? I don't believe we're using volunteers to run the elections. We pay the people that run the elections.
We pay the poll workers.
No, they've requested that poll workers be, if any of them would volunteer, they would appreciate it. And I know some people have volunteered.
Okay.
They're not being paid.
All right. So I would say that to Nick's statement there, maybe we find out from Corinne tomorrow if there's been.
Yeah, I will double check with Corinne. I know that this was the number that she gave us today. The largest portion of these costs is related to additional state requirements for early and mail-in voting. We're sending out, for instance, every voter in town was offered the opportunity to have a mail-in vote, mail-in ballot for any election in the year. About 2,000 or so people did that. So that means that every one of these elections this year will require the clerk to mail 2,000 ballots, print and mail 2,000 ballots. And the mail ballot is different from the ballot that you use when you show up to vote in person because it has to be folded in half, so it has to be done differently and comes with separate envelopes. So there's quite a bit of the cost that's tied up in that. We are going to seek to try to move some of those costs to the CARES Act funds.
Right.
But this represents what we believe are the full costs, the full additional costs in case we're not allowed to reclaim some of the stuff through the CARES Act. We will try, and if we appropriate this money and it doesn't all get used, it falls back to free cash next year. But at least this way, we'll know we will have the amount of money aside to run the election properly. We'll try to do it for cheaper, but.
Would this be something? I'm just kind of thinking if we get CARES Act money, this money would go to free cash, but we would have, even though it says it's negligible impact on the tax rate, if we took it from free cash to begin with, and we got CARES Act money, it would just go back into free cash. We wouldn't affect the tax rate at all. But I mean, it's.
Right. I think this one's, we're using a raise and appropriate right now. Right? This one doesn't, or are we still planning to do this one? No, this one isn't citing free cash yet, unless you want to change that. But where we've now gotten up to almost $30,000, it's about double where we had initially expected it to be. That would be, about a 2.5 to 3 cent impact on the tax rate potentially. And
I would almost, I mean, I'll let FinCom weigh in, but I would almost say free cash for this and cross our fingers that CARES Act covers all of it, if not some of it, and then it returns to free cash.
I mean, Joe, what is your ballpark on how much will be covered by CARES Act? Is it not to it, obviously, but if it's.
So for instance, like, last year you had a week early voting. So we're going to try to, so this year we have 2 to the Secretary of State's requirements now because of COVID-19. So we're going to try to remove the additional week worth of costs for early voting, for instance, to the CARES Act. But we're not sure that they'll approve that because they may look at it as voting. I'd also say that, one reason I would be in favor of having this be raise and appropriate instead of free cash is that I think it's probably likely going forward that the state, now that they've opened up early voting and mail-in voting, they're going to probably want us to stay with it because it creates
Yeah.
greater access to voting rights for people. And if that's the case, this is going to become part of your budget going forward. So
Yes,
if
good point.
we anticipate that, even if I can get some of the money back from CARES Act this year, I think it's better that we raise and appropriate it. And then if we get some money back from CARES Act, that's good for us for this year. It gives us a little extra free cash for FY22. But it gets baked into the budget going forward, because I think we're going to need to plan on larger costs for elections due to these types of changes.
I would agree with that. I mean, if you thought it was 95% we're going to get CARES Act funding and it was a one-time deal, then I would say free cash, but I think raise and appropriate is the way to go.
Yeah, after hearing that, that this may be the kind of the new normal, as everyone likes to say.
Right.
So it would be a regular occurrence. All right. I guess from my board, is there anybody that wants to make a motion to recommend favorable action on this one and keep it to raise and appropriate?
I notice it says Board of Selectmen 5-0 recommends favorable action. Did we?
These are
Some of these are carryovers.
These are just from
we just
the
carried
prior
over
template.
from other warrants, and we're waiting to fill in the right number. This is just for our purposes tonight. It's subliminal. I'm trying to convince you all to vote the way I want you to vote. Just carry over language from previous warrants. Sorry.
I'd move to recommend favorable action on Article 2-10.
Second.
All right. Any discussion? Okay. Roll call vote. We'll start with Darcy.
Darcy Dale, aye.
Rosie.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Jamie.
Jamie Knutson, aye.
Bill.
William Olson, aye.
And myself, Sean Farrell, aye. And FinCom, you want to weigh in?
Yep. So I would entertain a motion to recommend favorable action on 2-10.
I'll make that motion.
We recommend favorable action on 2-10. Sorry, Christina.
That's okay. Second.
All right. Any discussion? All right. All in favor, roll call vote. Valerie?
Valerie McCormick, aye.
Christina Schenk-Hargrove, aye.
Nick Tenson, aye.
Dave Wanger, aye.
And John Prulich, aye.
All right.
So on an unrelated note, but out of order, question for Joe. But Joe, the clickers for town meeting, those are being donated for, not donated, but they're free of use for this meeting, or are we paying for them?
We're going to be paying for them, but I've already got it approved to pay for those out of CARES Act fund by the state. So they're showing up. We've got the contract. Actually, I think we have them on hand because they showed up for Wenham's. I think we have them. And after we use them, as long as we're happy with them, we'll process payment at that point. The vendor knows he'll be here to run the software for us and show everybody how to use it and everything. I got good reports out of how well they worked in Wenham this past weekend. So.
Great.
How did it go? We did not pay for them last time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
We weren't going to pay for them last time because they were demoing them. This is actually a different company. It's not even the same company because when we went out to get bids, Turning Technologies was more expensive than Meridia. And so Meridia, we had to go with the low bid. Meridia's product is it's almost identical. It looks a little bit different, but it's about the same size. It runs the same way. And like I said, they worked well at Wenham Town meeting this past weekend. So, but that won't require a vote or anything. We're going to get it paid for with CARES Act money.
Thanks, Joe.
So one other thing on 2-10, would this be in the consent motion?
Good question.
I think we could put it in a consent motion.
Yeah.
How do people feel about that?
Yes.
Fine with that.
Yeah.
Good call, John.
Good.
All right, 2-11 DPW employee retirement. So this is an expected request of $5,600 for raising, appropriating, transfer from available funds. That money for funding earned sick and vacation time for retiring Department of Public Works employee. And this is because the employee didn't notify us that they were retiring earlier on, so we're doing it now. Any questions on this, or does anybody want to make a motion? This could even be consent, probably.
I think this would be consent too, yeah.
Is this free cash again?
On Marissa's recommendation, and I concur, this is raise and appropriate because this kind of line item is usually in the budget.
Yep.
It's usually in the budget on an annual basis for retirements, and you'd be kind of artificially deflating. We cut things out. We didn't know anybody was going to retire this year, so we removed that, but we would have been adding it back in next year anyway. So,
right.
Well, I'll make a motion that we approve the DPW employee retirement article number 2-11.
Second,
All right, and then a roll call vote. We'll start with Rosie.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Darcy,
Darcy Dale, aye.
Bill,
William Olson, aye.
Jamie,
Amy Knutson, aye.
and myself, Sean Farrell, aye. And I would include this one in the consent agenda.
And on the FinCom side, I will entertain a motion for favorable recommendation on Article 2-11.
So moved.
Second,
All in favor, roll call, discussion? All right, all in favor, start with you, Valerie.
Valerie McCormick, aye.
Christina Shankar-Grove, aye.
Nick Tenson, aye.
Dave Wanker, aye.
And John Prulich, aye.
All right, 2-12, master plan. Let's see if the town will raise and appropriate or transfer from available funds the sum of money necessary to fund a master plan, including all incidental or related costs, or take any action therein or relative thereto. Expected request is $150,000 from free cash. So our board and myself has been talking about this for a number of years. Our master plan is outdated. And I think it's time, even though it is a big expense and will take some time. I think it's well worth it, since we're kind of thinking about where we'll be when we grow up, per se, and trying to figure out what the next direction for the next 10 to 20 years is for the town. I think it's very relevant at this time.
And then we had a meeting recently where we put it on the top of our goals list for both the town manager and for the board of selectmen. So,
John, if I may, I'd like to raise
Sure.
a concern. My concern is not in opposition to the need for a master plan. We've already done so regarding housing. The other categories, however, would seem to me to be such that we ought to be undertaking this not at our sole expense, but with the hope for participation of the school committee and Wenham. That is, we are inextricably combined with Wenham, certainly in terms of the schools, and we're facing some anticipated significant expenses going forward in that context. The gas tank is a nice illustration of
This is just a
cooperative planning. And if you look at the brief summary and what the master plan is intended to capture here to allow for vision for the future, it seems to me that we need to combine forces. So I am questioning the prudence of appropriating or using free cash, for that matter, for $150,000 now, without seeking first, by taking no action at the moment, without seeking first to gain the collaboration of the school committee and Wenham. If that doesn't work out, we can always revisit this as with Hamilton being the sole actor at ATM. But the future seems to me, gentle people, to of necessity involve our working together with the schools and Wenham, and that has to involve planning for the future. So my suggestion is we take no action, we absorb a 4-month delay. After all, this is said to take 1.5 years to 2 years to complete. And in the 4-month interim, we seek to gain the collaboration, not only in terms of participation, but funding from Wenham as well as the schools. So I wanted to put that on the table for everyone's consideration.
yeah, I mean, interesting. I mean, I don't disagree with that. I think that, right, we're also in the middle of a pandemic that's not going to end anytime soon. So 4 months from now to sort of start the process, we may not lose anything just dealing with, COVID and et cetera, what's happening in the world right now. So I don't mind the idea of getting some more buy-in from the community, some more consensus. So I think it's important that once again we do it. We have to do either this town meeting or next town meeting. It's a big goal of ours. But if we think we build better consensus in town by having more discussion over the next 4 months, I could be convinced of that.
Would this also involve, say, if we needed to build a new school?
So I would remind that the school department's capital budget that was passed at the town meeting and with the debt override votes in June did include a sum of money. I think it was $250,000 out of their $900,000 capital request for their school planning. So I would see that us having availability of funds and be able to start would allow us the opportunity to start to work with the school district as they bring their consultants on board. I did reach out to Wenham, and Wenham town administrator Anthony Ansaldi, and he and I had a long conversation about this. He absolutely envisions Wenham wanting to undertake a master plan process, but not at this time. He says they just don't have the money right now. He wouldn't be able to get it passed. He said that he believes that the town, through its elected and appointed officials, would collaborate with us as we do our planning process. Certainly, the library, things like shared things that other shared things that we do, like the library and hopefully the fuel depot, looking at the future. But he says that he does not envision Wenham having the funds in the next calendar year or more to be able to undertake their planning process.
Yeah, I like David's statement. I, however, think that it's worth keeping on the STM warrant. I mean, I've been kind of preaching master plan since 2015. So there's no time like the present. And it's been years that I've kind of been working on trying to move forward with this. And I think, to Joe's point about Wenham's fiscal issues, I think including them in the school, I have a meeting tentatively planned after STM with the Wenham Board of Selectmen to discuss the school apportionment and other kind of joint things, as well as our master plan process with them, to see in what capacity they can participate in it. But as far as adding money to a joint master plan, I'm not sure if they're able to do that at this point in time. And there is, unfortunately, history with Wenham of I don't want to say not working with us, but having issues between our two town governments where we don't quite see eye to eye on what our priorities are.
Sean, I understand you have a new compatriot in terms of the Wenham board that may indicate or provide us the opportunity to change that history.
Right.
I'm sure you wish to do that. My concern is that we invest $150,000. We undertake in isolation of our partners, school and Wenham, and come up with recommendations that eventually become impractical, meaning the money was ill spent, because we do have this interlocking relationship, and we have to be cognizant of that as we look to the future.
Anybody else on the board want to weigh in?
I'd like to see if we could coordinate. Gary Cheeseman's the new member, and I don't know what happened at their town meeting, but they were going to expand their board to 5 people. I don't know if that passed or not.
So that vote did pass, but it's an advisory vote. They need to go through a government study process. I think that there's probably going to be, given the vote from town meeting, and from talking to folks over there today, I think there'll probably be some effort to put together a government study committee, but they're going to be at the very beginning of that process. You can't increase the board that way. You need to take a more deliberate effort. So,
right, and I think with this, for me, David, I see the value in working with Wenham and the school, but I do think there's enough of the Hamilton exclusive side of master planning that we could move forward with. We've got to start on the housing, but I think we've got our downtown and our kind of Winthrop school area and commercial development, et cetera, village branding, revenue sources, are working with planning as far as what we can develop and what we don't want to develop in town, and still keeping the character of the town. I think that's all the Hamilton side of things. When we get into schools and shared services, that's the Wenham and school board part of things. So I think the 150 would go towards the kind of exclusive Hamilton things, and we could include Wenham and the school into portions of that will be shared or have a common goal. But I would hate to hold us up on any forward progress on an outdated plan.
I agree that the example of the Winthrop school area bodes in a positive way for commercial and other revenue, perhaps, development, but doesn't that involve the school committee?
It does, and we've got, and I can't remember when the Winthrop lease is up, but it's up in the near future. And that will be a discussion in the next probably 2 years, I think it may be, or 3 years. It will be getting close to, I think we did a 10-year lease on that. So it will be discussion farther down the road, but not immediate.
Right.
Let me ask a question from a different point of view. The 150 for the actual consultant, do we know how that is broken out, in the sense that even though the school will certainly be in collaboration with the school will be necessary in developing this plan, because the school's got their own study and that they're allocating funds, do we see that collaboration actually saving us any money potentially? I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
So I mean, $150,000 is a good solid estimate based on what other towns have spent on master plans. Towns of our similar size, I think we spent $130,000 in Winthrop to do just the downtown district. So it's a town, quite a bit bigger than Hamilton, but to do the major commercial area for redevelopment for the future cost us all in around $130,000. So we're talking about a whole town here instead of just one neighborhood. And I think that for that amount of money, we get a good seasoned veteran of planning to be our consultant, and they would be able to plug into what the school department is doing if we design it that way and ask them to be sure of interacting with the consultant that gets hired by the schools.
You say you have an estimate. Couldn't we go out to bid and have more concrete numbers if we waited just 4 months? Because it's going to take that much time anyway to get a bid out to somebody.
So typically with this, so procurement law on a consultant for a master plan or for any planning or design project is a little different. We would typically develop an RFP based on the types of qualifications and the types of components we want included in our plan, and put it out, and then the price would come in separately. We'd basically be picking somebody, because we are not beholden to procurement law to pick a consultant for this kind of work. We would actually be looking to identify the consultant that we think would do the best job for Hamilton first, and then negotiate the contract. They would definitely want, as I said, we've seen a lot of these in other towns go for quite a bit higher. Some for a little bit lower. I think that this is about the ballpark. We conferred with Patrick Reffett and a couple of other towns about what they spent on their master plans. I talked to the Metropolitan Area Planning Council. I think there was some real consensus that even though we like MAPC and they do lots of things for us for short money, this was not the type of thing we wanted to do short money on. We wanted to actually have somebody that was going to specialize in a special plan, an individualized plan for Hamilton, not just doing something that would be seen as somewhat a little bit out of the box. So,
Joe, I'm sorry, it's not clear what you're saying, but are you saying we would not bid and we would just pick somebody? Or are you saying that we would send it out to bid for some? It doesn't make sense to me to just say we're going to pick you because we like you.
No,
It makes
the
more
procurement,
you
no,
have
the-
several options.
okay, that's not what I meant to say. If I expressed it that way, I apologize. The procurement process for this kind of procurement would normally be based on an assessment of the firms applying for the work. So we would put out a request for proposals based on what we're looking for in our plan. We'd have a number of respondents back. We would analyze those based on a criteria that would be set in the bidding process, not on price.
Okay, but that process that you just described,
Right.
Yeah.
we could do between now and ATM,
ATM.
and then have a more solid understanding of who we're recommending and how much it would cost, and we'd be further down the road, and we haven't cost us anything in the meantime. We haven't committed anything in the meantime.
Sure, we could do that.
But we
Right,
need to
and then
ask,
we-
we need to get the town people to say whether they want to do this or not.
And also,
mean-
it gives more time though for people to work with the other town and school board to see if they will tie in. That's my thinking.
But
Right.
you-
I mean,
right, 'cause-
I hear all that, but this is a free cash application. So I don't see the difference in STM and ATM if we're still committed to doing the process. I mean, I know we want to solicit more input, but I think we can do that in tandem with the funding mechanism, whether we do it at STM upcoming or we do it at ATM.
Well, I think part of it might be that start the process, you start getting proposals. We'll then actually know maybe it's lower than 150. Maybe there's collaboration that brings it lower. Maybe it's actually higher. We'll know the exact figure once we're pretty close to picking someone by ATM, and then we can pull the trigger on a vote on the actual specific amount.
But it's free cash, so if we don't use it, if we don't need it,
It goes back to free cash.
we'll just go back to free cash. I don't,
That's my thought is, if it's less than that, great. And we just give it right back to free cash. If it's more than that, we'd have to figure out how to appropriate a little bit more. But from the talks that I've had with Joe over the last year or so that's right in the ballpark.
and I think to get it started, we want to get this in front of the townspeople, and we want the townspeople to say yes or no. Do we want to do a master plan or not? And then if they say yes, he can get started. I think it's putting it backwards to say get started, and then we'll see if people want to do it or not. So it may not cost any money, but it's going to cost a lot of time.
Right.
and
We're going to
effort.
put a lot of kind of sweat equity into it before.
And just because
I think your point is that we want to buy in from the community, but does the community understand what it's for?
Right.
I think, and I'll say that from the standpoint of Sean, you've been working on this and been wanting this outline for years to get, but you're very much involved in it. When I hear it, I'm thinking, what's the master plan for? What do we need it for? And I've been right with you, but I haven't. It's still hard for me to understand what we need it for. And I think getting the selling it a bit before the meeting is going to be a lot easier than just bringing it up now and saying we need a master plan. This is coming in cold, frankly, from a standpoint of citizenry.
It might have a better chance of passing in ATM.
Yes.
Well, especially if we've got the details from the actual proposals that come in. And just
the fact that we put
Sean,
together.
I'm completely behind the master plan. I'm very much in favor of it. I'm also cognizant of the fact that we're asking for a lot of money at this meeting. And if this can potentially wait without losing any time, because we're starting the RFP process in the meantime, and it might help to actually sell it at ATM. It's close, like I said, I firmly believe we need to do this, and the more planning, the better. I think we struggle a little bit with explaining to the citizens what they're actually getting.
Other thoughts?
But sometimes, I don't know, sometimes it's a good idea to, sometimes things take a couple meetings to get passed because that's the best sort of venue to get it out there and tell the story and get people to have discussion. So I'm not against, I also sort of agree that kick the can down the road just because we're waiting on Wenham to get their act together or the school board to get their act together and join us doesn't help us out at all. So I think we can do it in tandem, like Sean said. Let's see if the community's behind, so they're not, then they vote no, and we decide if we want to do it again. I think it's more important, John, is who gives the discussion, right, at town meeting about what it's about. So I think if we don't have that plan, then we fail. So if we don't have a good presentation at town meeting on what this is about, then I think that's the discussion. But I think to put on the ballot is not, put in front of town is not a bad idea. I think we need to, we just decided, we had a meeting that we all decided it was a major goal of ours, right? So then just kick down the can another 4 months is like,
Right.
Okay, how?
Right.
wow.
It's tough for me that, you're breaking my heart here. It's tough for me to hear that it's everyone's number one priority, but we don't want to ask anybody.
But now
Right.
we're finding reasons not to do it. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So you're killing me here.
If I could I just add real quick that, this was originally on the warrant for the ATM, and
Right.
we were moving forward to having it favorably recommended by both your boards back in March. We hadn't got there yet, but I'd had positive conversations with everybody. I felt pretty optimistic about it. We took it off because we were trying to shrink the warrant and have as quick a town meeting as possible in June. So for me, this isn't just kicking it down the road another 4 months. This will be kicking it down the road a whole year.
Right. Exactly.
From where I first brought it up. So I just.
Also, isn't it 6 months? Isn't it 6 months from November to May?
Yeah.
It's May 1st, though.
5.5 months for kicking it down the road.
Well, it'd be a year because it'd be ATM the ATM.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I'd love to think that we could get buy-in from the school committee and Wenham to collaborate with us and all, but I think especially, after we've obviously had a lot of conversations, and I think it's a high priority. So I don't think there's a lot of harm in putting it out there. And I think, it's about what it's going to cost. And so I think we should go ahead with it.
In my view, it's actually an emergency because we are heading very quickly to a Prop 2.5 override, if not in the spring, then next year. And the school budget is just going up. And the only thing that we can do right now is raise taxes. I think this is the only way we're going to figure out if is there some other way we can do it? What are we going to do to get that all under control?
Right. I think that's a great point, Christina.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
That hopefully turns this conversation, right?
I make a motion to the board.
I was already
make a motion to the board Selectmen recommend favorable action on 2-12.
Was that a motion, Bill?
Yes, it was.
All right. Anybody second? All right. Any other discussion? All right. I'll take a roll call.
I think.
Say, is there a plan B in case people just find it's a little too rich for this meeting? Is there?
Well, I think that to your point, Darcy, I think hopefully we'll vote recommending this stay on the warrant and favorable action. And then if the town decides that it's too rich for their blood, as you say, we work more towards trying to share some of this cost with the school or Wenham. And I think we're going to dig in or put our heads together anyway, but I think we'll try to get a lower bid or something like that and keep working towards our goal. And like Bill said, we've had other things that we've brought back a couple of times at town meeting to fine tune. So,
yeah.
All right. So any other discussion? All right, then a roll call vote. We'll start with Darcy.
Darcy Dale, aye.
Rosie.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Jamie.
Jamie Knutson, aye.
Bill.
Oh, William Olson, aye.
And myself, Sean Farrell, aye. And then FinCom.
Yeah, I sort of flip back and forth, but I think I would be in favor of moving forward. So if others will join me, I will entertain a motion for favorable action on 2-12.
Second.
Is there a second? Or is there a motion actually?
So Valerie, you want to make yours the motion and I'll second?
Sure. I make so moved.
John,
Second.
John, for discussion, I'd like to suggest we
Sure.
table this until our next meeting.
That's fine. Yeah, if you'd like to have further discussion on this at the next meeting, I think that's appropriate.
Can I ask, if we wind up getting a favorable recommendation from the FinCom, would you want to consider this for the consent agenda?
That's a lot of money for a consent.
Yeah.
No, I would not.
Yeah, no, I definitely wouldn't.
That
I was gonna make that joke.
Yeah.
Joe and I kind of aren't joking though.
No, exactly.
Oh,
Well, we tried.
Yeah.
Is this a 50-50, I mean, it's a majority, simple majority?
Yes.
Yes.
Free cash vote,
Yeah.
free cash vote is simple majority.
All right. So John, your group has tabled it. Is that correct?
We've tabled, yeah.
Okay. So we can move on to 2-12,
No, it is 12.
or I mean 2
3-1.
3-1. Sorry. Council on Aging bylaw, and we had some, I don't want to say last minute edits, but we edited this a little bit. I think it's in the strikeout, right?
Yeah.
So to see if the town will vote to amend section 5 of article XXXIII of the town's general bylaws for the Hamilton Council on Aging bylaw by deleting language shown in strike through and inserting language shown in bold, or to take any other action thereon or relative thereto. And this is basically just kind of a little bit of reorganization of their board or their council. And the Board of Selectmen has talked about it a bit, and I think we're all in agreement on it. If anybody wants to add anything to what I'm saying before we make a motion, they're welcome to.
Yeah, I think on the section A that the alternate would have necessarily needed to be involved whenever the vote is planned for through the whole process, right? They can't just be in at the end of a meeting and then decide they're going to vote. They need to have been involved in the whole issue.
Right. And we had talked about this kind of briefly before at one of our last meetings, and we talked about maybe looking at the planning board's language. Did we do that, Joe?
I do not believe we did. I worked on this with town council, but I don't think we looked at planning board's alternate language. I'll do that before tonight.
Joe, can you
can also
Joe,
see
can you
if
read the
it's-
Galaxy A10E because it's giving some feedback.
Sure.
We also, I mentioned something about the CPC. I don't know if it's in the CPC bylaw, but our standard policy is if you're an alternate or you're a member and you're not at the meeting, that you testify that you've read all the minutes and watched the meetings or whatever up until that point, so you can vote on it. Like Rosie said, you wouldn't just walk in cold and make a decision.
Right.
And I think that's a concern.
Does that need to be in this language, or is there a separate policy for that?
Well, I think it could be.
There's a separate, there is a separate law essentially that relates to that particular issue. I would also say that the Council on Aging is probably going to be a lot different than the Planning Board or the CPC, where Planning Board in particular, where you have hearings that will go multiple meetings depending upon the complexity of a project. I would not expect the same thing from the Council on Aging.
Additionally, the Council on Aging is largely an advisory board. They don't really, they don't appropriate money. They don't vote to spend money, things like that. So it's.
So maybe my suggestion would be, and Tom, you can confirm this, if maybe the Council on Aging with this bylaw has a policy that is, if they don't already, that just says that any alternate member should, if there's a carryover in an agenda item, that they will make themselves familiar with the minutes from the past meeting to know all the information. I think that seems reasonable.
Okay.
And I have one just question. So it's the language of the warrant says deleting the language shown in the strike through and inserting the language shown in bold, but I don't see, it doesn't
bold.
Bolded to me.
Yeah, it doesn't show up. I'm not sure why in this version it doesn't, but in the most recent version that I had submitted and sent over to Joe, it does. I think it might have just been the way it converted over to the PowerPoint, but it will show as bold in the warrant, and specifically the language that's in bold is in the in 5A.
Right.
Where it adds in the words "and two alternates." And then that second sentence is a new sentence that is in bold as well. An alternate shall have voting rights, etc. And then in subparagraph D, the after the strike through language, the term that the language that follows after that, the remaining terms will be filled consistent with the Board of Selectmen's policy fulfilling committee vacancies. That's in bold as well.
I think I'm okay with all that as long as we have some kind of a policy for that, the council, that if there's an issue that is a carryover, that they're versed on what it is.
Right. And it's better to address it and resolve it now, I think, than wait until it comes up and it can cause issues, and we don't want that.
Did you want to include language in the bylaw, or do we want to just include it as a separate item to follow up with the Council on Aging to confirm that they have a policy in place? My understanding is that
I would say the
have to
latter,
look
Tom.
again, but I'm pretty sure that the law is in this area is that that's what is required anyways. So I
think
don't
it
know
is.
that.
Okay.
needs
Okay,
to be in the
and if
bylaw.
that's the case, I'm fine with leaving it as it is, Tom. That's fine. I just don't. I always like for language to be as explicit as possible, so that there's no room for reinterpretation or misinterpretation. So.
Okay.
All right, so I would, if we want to wait on this for a little draft of a policy, or I think it's already existing to what
Yeah.
Tom says, and I think it is.
Right, an alternate shall have voting rights pursuant to town policy only when a quorum is not present. So maybe that will be sufficient. Does that seem okay,
Yeah,
Tom?
that works for me. What do you think, Tom?
Let me.
Or town bylaw?
I would want to. Is there a specific town policy that we have that we're referring to?
Or town bylaw? I think it's a bylaw.
My inclination would be to leave that out. I think that, again, that we can confirm with the Council on Aging that they do have such a policy. And my recollection is that and I would just have to confirm, and I just don't have it off the top of my head, that the law in this area requires a person to certify that they have in fact read the minutes in order to participate in something that's ongoing from a previous night of hearings.
Yeah.
But let's say, if everyone's okay with it, this isn't really a big ticket item for me, so let's table it. And in the meantime, Tom or Joe, if you could find out if they do have a policy for that, and if they don't, let's just write a brief one for them and see if they agree to that, which I would assume they would, and then we can go ahead with the language that we have and vote on it on the 26th.
Perfect.
If you'll just keep us in the loop.
Yeah.
Final
Is that
language.
okay with the rest of my board?
Yeah, I think it makes most sense.
Yep.
Did Fink have any?
It's not really
have any
heavy
other
lifting,
comments?
but I'd like to have it all figured out before we vote on it.
Perfect.
And this could be a consent agenda item.
Can
Could
you?
it, or as a bylaw, can it be, Tom?
Yeah. I don't know.
Yes.
Oh, you muted
You
yourself.
muted, Tom.
Oh, sorry.
That's
It's a
okay.
majority vote, so that would be fine.
Okay.
Oh, great.
That's good.
FinCom, do you want to weigh in on this at all, or you gonna want to wait till we get that resolved?
Well, yeah, we can vote once you've got the final language or everything.
Yeah, there's no fiscal impact. It's just a,
No, and we
So-
certainly, from earlier discussions, don't have any issues, but certainly other members feel free to voice any concerns. But I think from what we've talked about it so far, we anticipate recommending favorable action.
all right. So we can move on, Joe. The next one, 3-2.
Yep.
Home rule petition to amend acts of 2010, chapter 91. This is to see if the town will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to petition the general court for special legislation to amend chapter 91 of the Acts of 2010, an act providing a tax exemption for certain qualifying real estate in the town of Hamilton, et cetera, by inserting language. And this has no impact on the tax rate.
I'm going to share with you the draft of the language that would be in the appendix. Hold on, so you can see it. Okay, so there's several strike-throughs and bolds here. Again, a lot of this has to do with kind of wanting to be able to make sure that there's different limits and recitation of assets and things in helping to qualify people for this program. This began as an issue that Tom and Marissa brought to us because the current law in section 3 says that the program would be offered in a range of $175,000 to $350,000, which seems to set a floor that we need to make that much. We've never done that much, but we don't want to be in continue to be in violation of our own bylaw. So we would be making this consistent in that the Board of Selectmen would annually set a cap. The cap in the past couple of years has been around $50,000. So we'd probably annually be spending about that much money on this program. We're also, as I said, leaving it able to be a little bit more flexible. The range of financial being financially qualified can change from time to time based on what the federal government does with other housing programs. And so we'd want the ability to amend that without having to do a bylaw change every year. And as I said, we're calling for in here an applicant to submit copies of their, not just their tax returns, but gross receipts from all sources of income, including assets, other assets that might be give them income, because the program is pretty well managed right now, but we have one or two applicants annually who we know have other assets that they're not reporting to us, and therefore they're qualifying for the program, but they're probably not really the type of people that were trying to be helped by this program in the first place.
Can we extend that, Joe? Can we extend that to the president?
If you were to reside in Hamilton, I think that that might be something that we could talk about. And then the last is an addition of a new rule here, that section 10, the Board of Selectmen may promulgate rules and regulations to implement the provisions of this act. Again, that's the a lot of this stuff is stuff that can be handled in the administration of the act, so it doesn't have to be handled in the language of the bylaw, but we want to make sure that we have the ability to put out forms that say that you need to submit this kind of documentation, and let people know what they're going to, how they'll be qualifying, et cetera. The other thing was also, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, was on the deadline, because the way the act currently reads, it takes like 18 months from start to end. So we're changing the application filing date to March 31st of the year that the exemption is being sought, so that it shortens up the process, so we're not following these things for 18 months.
Right, and that was also to be consistent with most of the filing deadlines under Chapter 59 for various exemptions. The deadline for submission is typically March 1st, so it was more to, I think, also bring it in line with that. And the other thing that I would note is that the form of the appendix will change. So the way this was originally drafted was in a red line, which I think is a good way to perhaps present it to town meeting, maybe as a handout, but the actual way this ultimately gets drafted will look more like legislation. So it essentially what it says is that section 1, section 2 remain the same. Section 3 will say essentially to rescind and replace section 2A and it will have the new language of 2A. So it won't show it in a bold kind of strike through format, because that's just not the way that special legislation would be drafted. And it's really presented in the form that it would be presented to the legislature in. So it may be something that you want to have as a separate handout at town meeting, so that it's perhaps easier for folks to follow along to see exactly what is being changed.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. We can include it in the appendices or be a separate handout completely. This seems like just good housekeeping to me.
Yep.
And I would say this could also be in the consent agenda.
I would definitely agree with that.
All right, and I'll entertain a motion from the Board of Selectmen to recommend favorable action on this one.
So moved.
A second by anybody?
Second.
All right, roll call. We'll start with Rosie.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Darcy.
Darcy Dale, aye.
Bill.
William Olson, aye.
Jamie.
Jamie Knutson, aye.
And Sean Farrell, aye. And then John, your board.
Does anyone have a need for any further discussion? All right, I will entertain a motion to recommend favorable action on Article 3-2.
I would move to recommend favorable action on Article 3-2.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, discussion? None, so roll call vote. Valerie, we'll start with you.
Valerie McCormick, aye.
Dina Shankar Grove, aye.
Did we lose Nick?
I don't hear him.
Dave Wanger, aye.
Nick, is Nick the guy that I muted?
He's
Oh,
the
he's not
I think
muted
he's the
anymore.
Galaxy A10.
He's the Galaxy A10.
Yep.
You know what? Why don't we just do a 4-0 vote right now? John Prulich, aye. We can always revote this at our next meeting to get it up to 5-0.
All right, appreciate that. In the sake of
Joe,
trying to be brief here tonight.
Before we move on, just a quick question to Joe. Joe, how is this program publicized to the community?
It's a good question. I don't know. I know that I've been talking to the Board of Assessors about this for about a year, and that they've had, annually about the same number of applicants. They've known about it. I believe the Board of Selectmen annually votes and has a vote in December announcing it, and they vote on the cap, even though that's kind of technically against the way this is drafted, and that's why we're fixing it. But they voted on a cap, and then we've made it known, and people seem to apply for it every year. Largely, like I said, it's people who qualify and will continue to qualify even after these revisions. There may be one or two that drop off from being able to be qualified.
Can they send it out with a tax bill? Just a little blurb?
Yeah, we can do that.
On a short piece of paper, just kind of.
Right. If you're over 65, you may qualify for a tax exemption.
Yeah,
Call Joe. Call Joe for more
Joe.
information.
I think Mary Beth puts it out in her newsletter
Does she?
with a handful of other exemptions and work off programs and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure Mary Beth puts it out at the COA. And I think maybe the Hamilton Fund does promote it as well.
Thank you.
All right,
Hey, Joe,
Yep.
Joe, could you send that document with the changes just so we can use it for our commentary?
Yep, I can do that.
That'd be great. Thanks.
All right, 3-2 when you're ready, Joe.
We got 4.
Wait, 3-3. Wasn't that 3-2?
That was
3,
3.
2, 3, 3.
That was the
We had
the
one
solar
drop off.
array.
We had one drop off, so this will become 3-3, and then the next one will become 3-4. We took out. We're recommending to take out the solar array on the safety roof because of the need to do a lot of work there before we could do the program. So we'll wait and bring it back in the annual.
All right, so 3-4, which is actually 3-3, lease for a temporary town hall. To see if the town will vote to authorize the Board of Selectmen to enter into a lease with Gordon Conwell, Theological Seminary Incorporated, for real property located at 130 Essex Street in Hamilton for purpose of temporarily relocating town hall under such terms and conditions, etc., that we, the Board of Selectmen, deem advisable, or take any action thereon or relative thereto. And this is a wonderful deal that we have with Gordon at the moment for them letting us move our town hall to their campus.
Do we have,
Do you want a
does
motion?
anybody,
I'm sorry.
You're
does
back.
anybody have any indication as to how much the renovations might cost?
Joe, you had an idea, right?
Yeah, there's money in the town hall project for this, and Tim actually thinks it's going to be a little bit under, but I think he has about $200,000 scheduled for. That's been carried forward since the beginning of the project because we were planning to have to outfit some building space. We don't think it's going to cost as much as we're currently carrying. So that's another area we're hoping to save some money in the project. But we're not doing anything major reconstruction wise. There's going to be some paint and making sure everything's clean and accessible. So
I was just curious if they're going to. We haven't seen a lease. Are they possibly going to ask us for some renovation work as a quid pro quo?
no, the only thing is that we have to outfit the building for the way we want it. So the furniture and updating the Wi-Fi and things that are going to be for us, and making sure all the doors work and that stuff for our use, and only the portions of the building that we're going to use. That was, Tom, you've seen the proposed lease, right, Tom? Tom?
Yes, I'm sure I did at some point. That's Lee Smith, my colleague, has been working on that matter. So I know at some point I did see a draft lease, but I don't recall the specifics off the top of my head.
We can include the draft lease in the appendices, and we'll get a copy of the FinCom.
And Joe, pardon me, liability insurance, the town policy will follow and apply.
Yeah, we'll extend the coverage to cover our portion of the building that we're using over there, and name Gordon Conwell as an additional named insured for that portion of the building that we're utilizing and have access to during the term of the. But again, that was all. I believe that was all contemplated in the lease. From my
I
last
believe
review.
so, that the lease does contemplate that the town would maintain some level of insurance throughout the term.
Is it a 2-year lease?
I think it's a 2-year lease to make sure we have enough time on it. And I think there's a clause, if memory serves, I think there's a
extension clause in
if we need to, yeah. So
I'll entertain a motion if somebody wants to make it.
I move that we approve Article 3 dash, is it 3 dash?
Let's call it 3.
3-3.
I'll second.
All right. I'll take a roll call vote. I don't believe there's any other discussion, is there?
It's 3-4.
Well, we've
It'll
cut
be
out
renumbered.
3-3, so this is actually 3-3. It was 4, but now it's 3.
Right, it was renumbered.
All right, so I'll take a roll call vote. We'll start with Darcy.
Darcy Dale, aye.
Rosie.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Jamie.
Jamie Knutson, aye.
Bill.
William Olson, aye.
And myself, Sean Farrell, aye. In FinCom, John?
I'd entertain a motion to recommend favorable action on 3-3.
So
So
moved.
moved. Second.
All in favor? Valerie?
Valerie McCormick, aye.
Christina Schenk Hargrove, aye.
Nick Tenson, aye.
Dave Wenger, aye.
John Prulidge, aye.
All right, and now we're on to 3-4. Citizen petition to see if the town will amend town bylaw for disposal of refuse and garbage by deleting the current language in the bylaw, replacing it with the amendment to set forth language appendix blank. And this is a carryover from our last town meeting, which we took no action on it. And I believe if all goes well, we'll be taking no action on it as well at this town meeting without it coming back to us. We're currently in our upcoming meeting on the 26th, talking about an compost program, which we already have in town, but making it a required program. And the bringer of this petition feels that that would satisfy his rescinding of the petition as long as we stayed with every week trash and made the composting mandatory or required. And previously we have recommended unfavorable action on this But I think now with the pandemic and the possibility of a increased composting program, we'll probably, I don't know if we'll make an action on it or we'll make an action on town floor. This one may warrant a little more discussion with our board to see how it kind of pans out at our next meeting.
And Mr. Chairman, on this one, as you may recall, we did an opinion on this particular article, and in our view, that this article would be advisory in nature only.
Correct.
So it would not ultimately be binding on the town, on the Board of Selectmen.
Right, correct. Does anybody from our board, do we want to table it until we have our compost discussion on the 26th? I think it probably be best.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah.
All right. FinCom, do you want to weigh in on this one at all?
I mean, I think everybody speak up if you disagree. I think we'd be in favor of no action. We were originally unfavorable action way back when. So I think probably just makes sense to formally weigh in after you've voted on the 26th.
Right, and then I'll ask you, John, and the rest of the FinCom. Gradle Clark's going to come to that meeting with the rest of the Waste Reduction Committee or whoever does show up for that meeting. We have a handful of documents about the recommended language and what other towns are doing or other countries are doing, et cetera, with a mandatory composting program. I'm sure you'd be interested in some of that because it affects our fiscal budget, because the more compost we have, the less comes out of our trash stream and reduces our waste rate.
Yeah, I mean, we're as a committee certainly all in favor of increased composting.
So I'll email you, John, the kind of documents that we get, and you can forward them on to your board. And if anybody wants to come to that meeting on the 26th to tune in, you're more than welcome.
Perfect.
All right, so we'll table this one until the 26th. And we'll move on to the last one. All right, this would be 3-5, correct, Joe?
Yep.
So our last citizen petition, and this is another one here. I'll kind of read it briefly. To see if the town will vote to require the Board of Health for the town of Hamilton to adhere to all guidance, metrics, rules, and instructions promulgated by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, DESE, and the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, DPH, concerning the opening and operation of schools in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts during the 2020-2021 school year and for the duration of the state of emergency in the Commonwealth regarding the COVID-19 global pandemic. And it goes on. I'm not going to read through all of it, but there's been a series of meetings with the Wenham's Citizen Petition Party and the Citizen Petition Party for Hamilton and the Board of Health. And I think everyone's come to an understanding. And Joe, do you know how Wenham's town meeting, did they take no action on this?
No, they narrowly passed it, 66-60. But again, they were advised that it was advisory in nature.
Right. As we are as well.
I think that it was slightly different between the two towns in that the Hamilton Board of Health has made some votes and changes to their votes to explicitly let the school district know and the public know that their recommendations on opening metrics were meant as advisory and not as Board of Health
mandates
orders. So the last time I heard from the proponent, they had suggested that they were likely to recommend no action, but who knows, now that it's passed in Wenham, they may be emboldened to do the same thing here. I'm not sure.
Right. So this may, I would say we wait to the 26th to talk about this one and maybe even invite Bill Heaney to this one to speak to it if he's going to want to take action on it, or we can convince him to take no action on it because it's been resolved. I don't know what other people feel, if we want to discuss anything now or we want to wait until we know.
I'll just wait.
Yep.
Yep.
FinCom feel the same?
I would certainly agree with that approach. Anyone else?
I'm fine with that.
All right, I think that pretty much wraps it up. Is there anything else that sticks out to anybody that could be a consent agenda item? I think we picked the ones that were pretty obvious. I think some of the other ones can't be, or would be better have a discussion if it need be.
The lease for town hall can't.
We could add that one to consent. Did we mention that or not?
No, we didn't. Tom, does the lease need more than a 50% majority?
You muted yourself.
No, sorry. No, it does not. It's a majority vote.
Okay, let's put that on the consent if everyone's okay with that.
Yep.
So how many is that on our consent? Is that 4 items?
4, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold on.
Well, it's
5.
5?
5, yeah.
That's pretty good.
6.
6? Okay. I like that.
2, 9,
I
2,
have, I have 7. Pool revolving fund, assessing department software,
I missed that one. You're right, 7. I didn't have full revolving.
Yeah, that's what I've got.
election, DPW.
Christina is on top of her game tonight.
Yeah, she is.
She's still awake. I'm
Good-
impressed.
Taking good notes. That's the only thing I have notes on.
Yeah, I
Gotta have
some-
priorities.
Exactly.
All right. If there's anything else anybody wants to discuss about the warrant or any of the votes, you're more than welcome to. Otherwise, I would entertain a motion from the Board of Selectmen to adjourn.
So moved.
Before we do that, Joe, I just have a quick question that's come to me regarding that property, and I forget the address. The fellow leased it from the state and has done improvements, and we thought it had been resolved, but apparently he's gotten.
Yep.
Island.
Yes, thank you. He's gotten both a tax bill and a delinquency notice.
I got back to him, and I also let the person know. Those notices are kind of automatically generated, and somebody needed to go in and pluck it out and say, don't send that one. So we've made the adjustment here on this end. Finally, sorry about that. He's not being charged taxes anymore, and we're making the adjustment to abate the taxes that have been assessed and not collected to date. So that's all going to get taken care of behind the scenes here. So sorry about that.
Thank you.
Great.
All right, Darcy, did you finish making your motion?
I moved to adjourn the meeting.
All right.
Second.
All right. Roll call vote. We'll start with you, Rosie.
Rosie Kennedy, aye.
Darcy.
Darcy Dale, aye.
Bill.
William Olson, aye.
Jamie.
Jamie Knutson, aye.
And myself, aye. And before we all sign off, I just really like to thank FinCom. I think we had a great meeting, even though it was kind of long, very productive and positive. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks. We have to vote.
Thank you
too,
all
right?
as well. No, I think this was a great way to do it. Get everything out on the table. So with that being said, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Valerie?
Valerie McCormick, aye.
Christina Shank Hargrove, aye.
Nick Tenson, aye.
Dave Wanger, aye.
And John Prulidge, aye.
Good.
Just to really quick say, Sean, I don't know what you're talking about. I think by joint meeting standards, this one's actually short. We're just over the 3-hour mark. I think the last time we did this back in June, I think it was over 4 hours. So
We're setting records tonight then.
Yeah.
Great.
So I wish you all well and stay well and healthy and have a good night.
Thanks,
Thank
David.
you.
Okay,
Good
thank you,
night,
everybody.
everybody.
Take care, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.